Okay. So I would like to welcome you to SPTH 5530, Neuroanatomy and Neurophysiology. And I would like to make sure that your microphone works. So that being said, I am going to call roll today. And when I call you, please talk to me. If you cannot talk, if your mic is not working, just you can type and let me know that, okay? Excuse me. Okay, so I'll go ahead and just get started by calling my role in the way that I see your names listed, okay? So the first person I see is Adriana Coates. And if I mispronounce your name, please let me know. So Adriana, can you say hi, please?
Hi.
All right, everybody could hear Adriana, correct? Yeah, okay, very good. Thank you. So I'll just call your first name and then just say hello. Allie or Ollie? Which one? Allie? Ollie? Okay. So is it Allie? If so, type yes. Okay, very good. All right, so your microphone is not working, I'm assuming, because you're typing. So at some point, I'll need you to get your microphone to work because I like for everyone to participate. Okay. Lissa.
Hello.
Hi.
Mom,
Good.
call me Allie as well.
Okay, all right, so we're going to call you Allie as well. All right, so then I'm going to have in class Allie A and Allie H. Okay. Amanda.
Hello.
All right, hi. Angela.
Hi.
All right, Audrey.
Hello.
Good. Brittany.
Hello.
Okay, hello. Chelsea.
Hello.
Okay, good. So far, so good. Sierra. So, Sierra, I can't hear you, so I can see that
Hello,
you're trying.
can you hear me?
Yes, there we go. Very good. Hannah.
Hello.
Hannah, how do you pronounce your last name?
Plantinga.
Okay. Plantiga? Is that correct?
Yeah.
All right,
Yeah,
thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome.
All right, Jacqueline Paris. Okay, so Jacqueline, I see you trying. Try again for me.
Hey, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you now. Thank you. Okay, Jacqueline Wagner. Okay, so I can see you trying, but I can't hear you.
Now can you hear me?
Yes, I can. Thank you.
You can call me Jackie, please.
Okay, Jackie. So, Jacqueline Paris, are we calling you Jackie too? Or Jacqueline?
I actually go by Nikki.
Oh, you go? Okay, well, I better write that down. Okay, how'd you come up with how do you get Nikki out of Jacqueline Paris? Is that a middle name?
My middle name is Nicole.
Oh, okay. That makes sense. Okay. All right, so let me put, just for the record, Nikki. Okay. Thank you. Jenna.
Hello.
Okay, Jenna, how do you pronounce your last name?
Sadzinski.
All right, very good. Okay, thank you. Well, Joshua, welcome back to my classroom.
Hey, how's it going?
It's going fine. All right. Julie.
Hello, good evening.
Good evening to you. Kendra?
Can you hear me?
I can hear you now. Good. Thank you. Okay. Kiana?
Hello.
Good. Very good. Lakin?
Hi.
Hi, Lakin. Lillian?
Hello.
Okay, and pronounce your last name again. We have met, and you have told me how to say it, but I would like to hear it again.
Moeti.
Okay, Mutwa Moeti, is that correct?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Lindsay?
Hello.
Good. Michelle?
Hello.
Michelle, pronounce your last name.
It's Pachars.
Pacharis. Okay, very good. Thank you. Natalie?
Oh, hello.
Good. Thank you. Okay, yes, we can hear you. Nicole?
Hi.
Hi. Rachel? Hi, Rachel. Rola, it's good to talk to you again.
Hi. How are you, Doctor?
Doing fine, thank you. And I know you'll step out for a little while tonight. So, okay, Shelton.
Hello.
Hi, Shelton. Tiffany.
Hi.
Hi, Tiffany. Whitney.
Hello.
Okay, so have I missed anyone in the class? Let's see. Is there anyone who has not checked in? Give me 1 minute.
Hello.
And to who was that just now that said hello?
Can you hear me? This
Oh,
is
this is Allie. Very good. Allie Austin? Okay, your mic worked. Very good. You fixed it.
Yeah. I'm sorry. I'm having a drop, so I had to drop somebody off, and I'm headed home.
Oh, no, that's quite okay. Not a problem at all. I certainly understand. So let me just make sure that I have heard from all of my students. Let's see. Yes. I'm just checking your name off of the roll. Okay, so 1 minute. All right, let's see. Good. Let's see. Kiana. Okay, so I am happy to see that everyone is in class tonight, and I'm looking forward to teaching you and you learning from me and me learning from you. This class will be meeting every Wednesday evening from 5:30 to 9:30, and I tend to keep my classes during the whole time because I generally need the time. So that being said, I'll try to make it as interesting as possible and as interactive as possible. So I won't be doing all the talking. You'll be doing some talking too. And I'd like to try something called Cahoots with this class, but I have to see how it's going to work. So I may do some fun quizzing where we're competing with each other. So your computer, everybody needs to have a computer that obviously works, so you can do Cahoots. Has anybody ever done Cahoots before? Yay, it's fun, isn't it? Kendra, do you like Cahoots? And you can talk to me. Please raise your hand if you want to talk, but I do want you to talk. Okay? Yeah, I love using it with. I work with children over at one of the magnet schools, and they love Cahoots. We'll come in and they will compete against each other. It is so much fun. And I said, you know what, I'm going to try that with Neuro. So what it is, it's an online quiz, and your kindergartners and first graders love it. Yes. Well, it allows you to respond, like I can make up a quiz and everybody gets to answer, and then it shows the right answer and it shows who's winning, so we can do some things like that to kind of review. I want to first talk to you about the course syllabus, and then I want to talk to you about how the course is structured in terms of eLearn, and then we will do our first lecture tonight. We will look at YouTube videos, and we will, you'll have to do some coloring in a coloring book, and you'll have various assignments to do. I may use Wigio as well. Wigio is an interactive course tool that allows you to share documents, work in groups, talk to each other, so forth and so on. So we'll try to use a variety of different types of technology to make the course interactive as well as to help you learn. If you have a question, I would like for you to ask the question instead of typing it. So all you have to do is raise your hand and I will recognize you. Okay? If I ask a question of the whole class, then usually it's going to be a question that can require 1 or 2 words as opposed to multiple long explanation or multiple sentences. So in that case, then you might be able to type the answer. Okay? All right. So have you had an opportunity to look at your course syllabus? If you have, then just say yes. Okay, very good. So I would like to go through the syllabus, so if you have any questions, then now is the time to ask. And I want to make sure you understand what your course is about and what your objectives are for this semester. So again, you are in neuroanatomy and neurophysiology. So neuroanatomy is the study of the structure of the brain, and neurophysiology is the study of the function of the brain. Okay? Here's my contact information. If you are in Tennessee, if you're in Nashville, you can always come to see me. I'm on the Avon Williams campus. Those of you who've not been to Tennessee State, you will get the opportunity to become intimately familiar with the campus because you will be doing your first clinical practicum in July. So I'm looking forward to meeting you in person. Okay? So my office is P207. You'll find me very easily in the department. I do have an open door policy. I am the chair of the department, so I have people coming in and out as, you know, necessary. Or even just to come by and say hi, but you're welcome to see me at any point in time. My office hours are Monday through Thursday, 3 to 5 p.m. But of course, if you have a question, you are to email me in eLearn. Anything course related should be in eLearn, so use the email in eLearn. Okay, so you already know we're going to meet on Wednesdays from 5:30 to 9:30. And of course, my email address, my TSU email address is tsmith31@pennstate.edu. Please make sure you put the 31 because there are many different T. Smiths on this campus, so if you don't put 31, your message will go to someone else. Okay, so this course is designed for you to learn about the structure of the central nervous system, the function and the vascular system, the cellular system. It is designed to teach you how to recognize signs, symptoms. We'll talk a little bit about treatment, prognosis of disorders resulting from damage to specific areas of the central nervous system. And of course the emphasis is going to be on speech, language, and auditory function. And so when you think of this, we're really talking about what happens when there's an injury to the brain as it relates to that person's ability to communicate. So if someone has like a massive stroke, then depending on where the stroke has occurred, what artery is affected, or what area of the brain, the frontal lobe, temporal, peripheral, so forth and so on, then that determines the type of speech and language deficits that we see. Okay? So this is what this course is designed to do, to teach you to become competent speech-language pathologists and to recognize, just by looking at someone, where damage has occurred and what problems that person may or may not have. And then, of course, we also want to prepare you to be able to assess and treat people who have brain damage. Okay. No, you can use my cell. You can call me on the cell phone, but the thing about the cell phone is that I will only answer a number if I know who's calling me. So that being said, I'm happy to give you the cell phone number, but you'll have to give me yours too. So if you want to call me on the cell, then what you'll need to do is to send me a text with your number and tell me who you are so I can put you in, and then when the phone rings, I'll know that it's Angela O'Rourke. Okay? All right, so would you like my cell phone number, class? If you would, just say yes. Okay. All right, very good. So I am typing it. Okay. So, and it is an Atlanta cell phone area code, although I'm in Tennessee. Okay? So once you get it, then send me yours back with your name so that once the numbers come in, I can just save them as you, and then I'll respond to your call. Otherwise, you can call me all day long, and if I don't know who it is, I won't answer. Okay. All right. Because I'm not a phone person, number one, and number two, I figure that that person must not have meant to call me. Okay, so this is course description, and of course we've talked a little bit about the rationale already. If you understand the anatomy and physiology of the central nervous system, if you understand the gross external and the internal neuroanatomical structures, as well as the organizational function of the brain, then it helps you to become knowledgeable about different types of neurological diseases that are associated with damage to specific areas of the CNS. So that's the rationale, and it helps you to become a better speech-language pathologist. And on that note, I'll ask a question at the end of talking about the syllabus, but I want you to think about whether or not you know someone who has had a brain injury, whether it be a stroke, some type of dementia, a traumatic brain injury, or some type of right hemisphere damage. And just think about that, and then I'll give you an opportunity to talk to me and tell me about the things that you have noticed and observed about the person that you may know who has had a brain injury. Okay? All right. The major course learning objectives. Well, the major goal is for you to acquire the knowledge and skills that are necessary for the ASHA 2014 standards, because you started this program under the ASHA 2014 standards for the Certificate of Clinical Competence in Speech-Language Pathology. But in August, and specifically August the 1st, the new standards will come into place. August the 1st, 2017 standards will be in place. you will graduate under the old standards. So this course is designed to make sure that you have acquired the knowledge and skills that are necessary for you to meet the 2014 standards. And of course, we are implementing some of the 2017 standards with our current students, even though they may have graduated under 2014, or you may graduate under the 2014 standards. You graduate under the standards that you came in under, okay? So, for example, in 2017, the standards will require inter-professional practice, inter-educational practice. And when I say that, it's really interdisciplinary. But we've already had our students to participate in simulations. In fact, 2 simulations in which we were the only program in speech pathology there, with about 400 plus students. So they worked with doctors, pharmacists, social workers, OTs, PTs, so forth, on cases to come up with treatment plans. So we're already implementing some of the 2017 standards. What are the competencies that I want you to acquire which fall under the 2014 standards? Well, you need to be able to identify the major structures of the central nervous system and the peripheral nervous system. So structure and function. This is what we call gross anatomy. You're going to identify the internal structures of the cerebral cortex, the midbrain, the pons, the medulla, the spinal cord, and you will describe their functions. The internal structures are important for you to know because tracks run through those structures, both sensory tracks and motor tracks, okay? You need to be able to identify subcortical structures such as the basal ganglia. A lot of disorders of movement occur when there is damage to the basal ganglia area. From the standpoint, if you've ever seen someone who cannot inhibit inappropriate movements, like for example someone who might have Huntington's chorea, or someone with Parkinson's disease, or someone with a dystonia. So we'll talk about those internal subcortical structures. The diencephalon is something that is the thalamus or hypothalamus, but the thalamus is important for, many different functions. Thirst, hunger, sexual appetite, so forth and so on. The limbic structure is important for memory and emotion, so we'll talk about those structures. You need to be able to identify the cranial nerves in their site of anatomical locations, and you have to be able to describe the sensory and motor functions of the cranial nerves. Because if you have damage to the cranial nerves, at least 7 of those cranial nerves are important for speech, like the hypoglossal, the glossopharyngeal, the trigeminal, so forth and so on. You also need to be able to describe the circulation of the cerebral vascular system as well as the cerebral spinal fluid systems and their pathology. So, for example, one of the largest arteries in the brain is the middle cerebral artery. It supplies blood to the lateral portion of the brain. So if you were to take your hand and just put it on the side of your head, going from where the eye is located back toward the neck area, that whole artery, if you have problems with the middle cerebral artery, we call that the artery of stroke. So you may have problems talking, understanding, fluency would be a problem. So, and there are many different types of, we call that the artery of aphasia. Those are all of your aphasias result from problems with that artery, okay? So you got to learn about the blood supply to the brain. Very important. We have to talk about the visual pathways and the auditory pathways. The visual pathway starts at the eye, at the retina area, and it goes all the way back to the posterior area of the brain where the occipital lobe is. So if you have a problem anywhere along the pathway, it will affect either your peripheral vision or your central vision. And that's important for you to know because you're trying to do therapy. The person has problems seeing peripherally, so then you would have to make sure that you put your materials within that person's line of vision. The person might not be able to see in one eye because of damage to the visual system. So you need to know that so you can compensate for the problems that that person may have. So we're going to talk about visual field deficits, and then we'll talk about neural pathways of proprioception. And proprioception has to do with space and time and pressure, things like that. Okay. Any questions thus far about the competencies? And I'll ask that from time to time, and so I do expect a response so that I know whether or not you're understanding. Okay. We will talk about the neurological exam, but I won't talk about it a lot. I'm going to bring my cousin in. He is Dr. Harold Thompson. He is the head radiologist at Vanderbilt at the VA hospital, and he does all the studies across, oh my goodness, 5 different states. He's a bad boy. But he'll come in, he will teach you guys, he'll talk to you about the different types of neurological examinations that are done, as well as clinical and diagnostic techniques that he uses to assess the brain function and to observe structure. We'll also talk about the common types of neurological diseases that are associated with speech and language deficits, such as the different types of stroke, like Broca's aphasia, Wernicke's aphasia, conduction aphasia, transcortical motor, transcortical sensory, anomic aphasia, so forth and so on. But we'll talk about the different types of dementia you might see. We'll talk about frontal temporal lobe deficits or problems. We'll talk about right hemisphere disorders because they're quite different than the type of problems that you will see if the damage occurs to the left side of the brain. We'll talk about motor or movement types of disorders such as Ballism, Tourette's syndrome, whatever, Parkinson's, so forth and so on. Okay? Good. Yeah, it's going to be fun, guys, and I'll show you as many videos as I can to prepare you for aphasia, but you'll learn about those things as we talk about structure and function here, because I believe that you can't hear them enough. The more exposure you have, the better you become. Okay? So those are the course competencies. How am I going to teach you? Well, we will be in Blackboard Collaborate. Your PowerPoints are all loaded under the class content, course content section in eLearn, but we're going to learn information, first of all, that is more rote, because you have to learn structure and you have to learn function, and that to me is memorization. Okay? So you got to memorize this stuff. You just got to become familiar with it. You've got to learn it. All right. But then once you learn it, we will begin to apply it critically. Okay? Yes, Allie H.
So will we be meeting in Blackboard all semester, or will we meet in person?
Well, you will meet in Blackboard all semester, but when you come on campus, you will meet in person. Okay? Because you will be here for 3 weeks, I believe, and so that being said, I'll just pull you in the regular classroom if you guys don't have a problem with that. And that's normally what I do when I teach this. I take my distance students and pull them into the regular classroom when they're on campus. So fortunately for you, I'll get to actually see you and stand before you as well. And then when you go home or whatever, then we will meet in Blackboard Collaborate, okay? All right, so we'll do traditional lectures, but we're going to use audio-visual aids as well. And so I like to show YouTube videos. Now, I can show a YouTube video in Blackboard Collaborate with no problem, but it depends on how fast your computer is. So what I normally do when I show a YouTube video is I will tell you to copy the web address, and then I will allow you to go out and look at the video if you can't see me showing it at the same time. So let me give an example. Like, for example, let's see. I'm just going to YouTube right quick. Oh, it's not displaying the page. Okay, make sure the web address. Well, let me just do this. Oh, I don't even need to do a web address, I think. Let's see. Okay, there you go. Can you see that? There's a man sitting up on stones, on rocks. Okay, so some people say yes, and some people say no. So this is what I'm talking about. This is the difference in your computers. Okay? So if I want to show the video, what I will do, for those of you who said no, and I don't know how many people say no, but some people can see it now. Okay, so you can see it too now. So it means it takes a while to come up. So let's see. Let's see if I do this video.
Hello?
Can you see it and can you hear it? Something is playing right now.
My interpreter.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. So we have the, oh, she's getting ready to sing. Okay, this would be fun to watch because I love these kinds of things. However, I've got to get back to class. Okay, so I'm just showing you that I have the ability to show you YouTube, and so we'll use YouTube videos. Now, for those like whose computer may take a while to be able to see, I'll give you a few minutes, and if everybody can't see it, I'll cut and paste the web address and put it down in the whatever the box is down there in which I type. And then you can, you know, see the video yourself. But I think it's easy or better when you can begin to understand how the brain functions by seeing the effects it has when there's a problem or some type of disorder. So that being said, we will use videos, we'll use whatever we can use to make sure that you understand structure, function, and you can identify disease, and then you can critically think. Okay? All right, so let's move on. Your textbooks, Batnagar, 2013, Neuroscience, the Study of Communicative Disorders, 4th edition. So that's your textbook. Now, how many of you already have the textbook? Okay, good, because your first assignment is to read, you need to go ahead and read chapters 1 and 2. Okay, and get those out of the way. And I mean read them and learn them, but we are going to talk about them. I do have PowerPoints for the chapters, and we will review those PowerPoints. And what I do suggest is that You take time and do the review questions at the end of your chapters because they will help you learn the material. But you can also see that our second required textbook, which you're going to have a hard time finding, is a McNeil text. It's called a Neuroanatomy Primer, Color to Learn. So it's a coloring book. But if you look under the content section of the course in eLearn, you'll see the coloring pages down at the very bottom. I'll give you 4 different sections of pages to color. So you don't have to buy the coloring book. It's on you if you want to buy it because it's going to be hard to find because I think they stopped making it, but I still like to make you color. Now, the reason for that is this. Some people are visual learners, some are auditory learners, some are tactile learners. So we're going to see, we're going to hear, and we're going to touch, okay? And touching, it might be, you know, it may help you to color the structures, not only just to see them, but to color them as well to help you remember where they are. Okay, so don't worry about buying the Neuroanatomy Primer if you can't find it. It's a great resource, but I've given you coloring pages. Okay. Attendance. Mandatory. Attendance is mandatory. All absences must be excused. The reason is this. We've got 4 hours of lecture. So if you are some activity, whether it be lecture or whatever, if you are not here, I cannot go back over the material, okay? And it might be, it's hard to, sometimes I find it's hard for students to kind of catch back up if they miss so much. Now, that being said, I also expect you to participate and to talk to me. So I expect that everybody in here needs to be ready to raise their hand, to say something, okay? There is an attendance policy at TSU, and I think that you can have 3 classes, but that you miss, but you should have, you know, some type of excuse. And that's without failing, of course. Now, I'm not that stringent. Of course, you guys are adults. If something happens, if you know, life happens. Life is life. So if for some reason you cannot attend, I would just appreciate that you let me know, notify me. My phone number is there. There's my email address, or you can email me in eLearn. But let me know prior to the class, okay? Cell phones. Now, I'm not in a standard regular classroom with you, so technically you can mute your microphone and talk on your cell phone or whatever, but I hope that you will just attend to the class. When we are on campus, unless you have a child or something, or you're expecting, I really always say turn off the cell phones, no exceptions, but it's okay with me if you have kids or something, or you're expecting a call that's an important call, but if you have to take a call when you're here on campus, please exit my classroom, okay? No texting and all that kind of stuff on the cell phone. I need you to pay attention. All right. Your exams, you'll be required to satisfactorily complete all of your quizzes, your midterm, your finals, and any kind of assignments that I give you. You're expected to take all class examinations when they are scheduled. Now, I have not put in the assessments, you're going to take them online. Your midterm must be proctored, so you will have to go to a site to take the midterm, a testing site, or you can come to TSU to take it if you're close in. The quizzes, they don't necessarily have to be proctored, but you're on your own on an honor code system. And of course, quiz 1, midterm, quiz 2, and then final will be the examinations that you take. Okay. If you miss an exam, you have to have my permission to make it up. And it has to be for a good excuse, because you know, if you're just not ready to take it, that's not a good excuse. I expect you to study along the way. I expect you to put time in the class. But if some extenuating circumstance happens, then of course I will work with you. But it needs to be like really extenuating, not like, okay, I had a dance recital. Okay, Audrey?
Is the final also proctored?
Yes, midterm and final are always proctored.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. I reserve the right to determine the nature and date of all rescheduled examinations. Like occasionally students will ask, can they retake an exam? They didn't do well, and of course I do reassess, but you know, you guys have to do it when I'm available to do it because I'm very busy. But your ability to do well is what's important to me. Disability accommodation statement. If you have a disability that might interfere with your class performance or attendance, then you need to really contact the Office of Disabled Services. If you're close enough where you can go to the Office of Disabled or Disability Services, not disabled, but Disability Services, then by all means, it's located in Keene Hall in room 131. If you are out of state or you live too far away, then you can contact them by calling the 963-7400 number, and of course the area code there is 615. Or you can go to their website for additional information. You must speak to the Office of Disability Services staff, and you must provide documentation of the problem that you're having so that they can decide what is the best accommodation for you. If you qualify for an accommodation, the staff person or your counselor in that area will provide you with a documented statement explaining the type of class accommodations that the professor needs to make for you. And the professor does not have to know what your disability is. So I do want to say that. All we need from you is a copy of the document with the instructions regarding the type of disability that we need to make. I mean, not disability, but accommodation that we need to make. And it is your responsibility to make sure, let's say that I have a copy of this document, okay? I can only give you an accommodation after I have received the instructions, and the accommodations are not retroactive. So let's say, for example, you take quiz 1, but you did not give me a statement telling me I needed to modify or make some type of accommodation for you. And then you decide, well, now I think I need to go get my statement. Well, that doesn't make it retroactive back to quiz 1. As soon as I get the statement, that's when the accommodations are in place. So going forward, I can make accommodations, but I won't retroactively go back and make accommodations. Any questions about that? Okay, good. If no questions, remember, I need you to answer so that I know whether or not you understand. All right, so I know this is an online class. However, there is, all universities, and particularly here, there is a policy regarding sexual misconduct, domestic and dating violence, and stalking. And I want you, and TSU recognizes how important it is for you to be in an environment where you can learn. So in that environment, it needs to be free from discrimination, sexual harassment, sexual assault, domestic violence, dating violence, or stalking. So if you've experienced any of these types of problems while attending my class or the university, then the university does have resources that you can use or access to assist you with your health, counseling. Sometimes this type of behavior will affect your academics. So we want you to know that you are protected, and you are protected. The university's job is to protect you, and they must protect you. And they can also provide a legally binding protective environment. The thing you got to realize, though, is if you are in a situation like that and you decide to disclose to me, which I hope that you will, I have to be a responsible employee. And that means that I am required to report the incident, you know, whether it be stalking, sexual violence, so forth and so on. So if you tell me about the situation involving sexual harassment, sexual assault, so forth and so on, I must report the information to the Title IX coordinator. And even though I have to report the situation, you still have options about how your situation will be handled, and you still have the options about whether or not you want to file a formal complaint. So the goal is to make sure that you're aware of the options. You will be encouraged to contact the TSU Title IX coordinator to report incidents of sexual harassment, sexual violence, so forth and so on. And that being said, the contact information is in your syllabus, but also in this PowerPoint. I feel that is absolutely so important for you to know where you can go. So phone numbers are there. And then if you need, and the building number and the suite number is there. If you want to read information about the policies as it relates to sexual, domestic violence and stalking, then there's a website that you can access at TSU. So that's where all the policies are and the procedures. Harassment and discrimination are not going to be tolerated either. For any reason, the university is committed to compliance. As it, I'm reading something as I'm looking at you. They're committed to complying with federal, state, and local laws. We know that it is against the law and it is prohibited to discriminate or harass somebody based on their race, color, gender, age, disability, veteran status, and so religion, so forth and so on. There are other protected categories as well. So we want to make sure that you are not subjected to any type of discrimination or harassment, and that you're allowed to participate in all classes and all activities that are provided by the university. And here again, if you feel that you're being discriminated against or harassed because of a protective class, now like something like sex, religious preference, gender, so forth and so on, then of course here's the contact information again, and there is information on the website. Anybody have questions about the points that we have talked about? These are just notes or things that you need to be aware of for your ability to feel safe, as well as for you to be successful in this class. So now that we've gotten through that part, how am I going to measure your performance? Okay. Well, I want to know that you have achieved above average, at least average to above average, or excellent performance on the course competencies. And that means you must obtain suitable scores on exams, and or if you have projects, your evaluation must be satisfactory. And you have to demonstrate knowledge and understanding of the content. So that being said, guys, you can't fail a final exam and then say, well, I'm competent, because my final exams are comprehensive. So, you know, let's look at the course requirements. You are to participate in all class discussions. I like participation. I like it when you talk, because it allows me to know what you know, and it allows me to learn from you, and it also allows me to correct something if you have misunderstood. Do your class readings. Your chapters you must read. Just because I'm doing a PowerPoint lesson doesn't negate you from your reading assignments. Take your exams on time, do well on them, and do your homework assignments, including the neuroanatomy coloring book. This is your criteria. You're going to get 10% for your class homework. Your class homework would be the coloring book. And note, I'm not going to grade the coloring book. I am going to take it up. I am going to check off that you actually colored the pages, but that's an easy 10% of your grade. Your quizzes will be 20% of your grade. So since you have 2 quizzes, the first quiz will be 10%, the second quiz will be 10%. So they have equal weight. All right, so if they're 10% of 100, that's only 10 points on the quizzes. So please note that if you get a 70 out of on a quiz out of 100, then that's 7 out of 10 points. Okay? Midterm is 30%, and you see your final is 40% of your grade. All right, you don't have any papers that you have to do. All you have is homework that you might have to do, and these other types of assessments. Your grading scale, you are on a 7-point grading scale. So please be mindful that an A stops at a 93. However, if you get a 92.5, I am happy to give you an A. Not a problem, because if it's 0.5 or up, I'll curve up. Okay? Please note that an 84 is a C. Okay? So 84 down to 77 C's. D's start at 76. And of course, I don't need anybody performing in the C, D, or F area. B's and A's comparable, because you guys are exceptional, and I expect that you will do the work, and I expect you to be successful, and I expect you to make A's. But that means that you got to make the A's, okay? And I know that you can do it. Okay. So I want to give you an example. Do you guys have your course outline? Have you had an opportunity to review your course outline, not to look at it? Okay. Well, I don't know how it looks in eLearn. I guess it does, but you see it's color-coded to kind of give you some idea. So what you have is a date. So today is the 7th, and your reading assignment for today is Chapter 1. Well, actually, I said read Chapters 1 and 2, but you can read Chapters 1, 2, and 5. So today we're going to go over the scope, principles, and elements of neuroscience, which is Chapter 1. Has anybody had an opportunity to read Chapter 1 yet? And if not, no big deal. This is just the first night of class. But read it, and read it at your own pace, okay? All right, and what I did was, I do want to say that my PowerPoints I actually did the PowerPoints based on the chapters. So the information on the PowerPoint comes directly from the chapter, except for I like to put pictures in and all that kind of stuff. So we're going to talk about the scope, principles, and elements of neuroscience. And so the lesson that you should be reviewing is Lesson 1A, Scope, Principles, and Elements of Neuroscience. Okay? Next week we'll talk about the basic physiology of the nerve cells. And so you need to read Chapter 5 and then review Lesson 1B, Neurons and Associated Cells. associated cells, okay? So you can see that each week you'll have a date that you're going to do something. Now, you'll also notice that because we are a 4-hour class, it allows me to get through the basic physiology of the nerve cells, but it also allows me to begin talking about gross anatomy of the CNS. Okay. You see, so next week we're going to do chapters 5 and chapter 2, at least start chapter 2, depending on how far we get, because I reserve the right as a professor to go as slowly as I want to go or as fast as I want to go. I'm more likely to go slower than faster. Okay. On the 21st, we'll also be talking about gross anatomy. So you see 2 days for basic physiology of the nerve system. Well, no, 1 day for that and 2 days for gross anatomy, okay? Then there'll be an identification activity. Now, have you had an opportunity to go through the course content area of the class? Because if so, you'll see that the way I arranged the class was, and I should have put that up, but I can't put that up right now. But let's see. The way I arranged the class is, give me 1 minute. I'm going to pull up the course content. And if you can pull up the course content area in another window, then do so, just like I'm doing, so that I can show you something. Okay. So I'm going into another window, and I want you guys to go into eLearn, but leave up Blackboard Collaborate, if you can do so, please. Okay, and okay, so I'll try to, yeah, this is what I'll do so I can at least see what you guys are looking at. Okay, so this being said, let me know if when you're in eLearn and in the table of contents section, please indicate by saying yes. Okay, good. If you're not in yes, please. If you're not in yet, please indicate by saying no. Okay. So I still have one person trying to get in, which is fine, not a problem. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Okay, yes. Okay, those of you who are not in, let me know when you get in. Okay, I think everybody is in. All right, good. So that being said, now, what you'll notice in your table of content is you have your syllabus, your course outline, you have units 1 through something, 1 through 8, and then you have the neuroanatomy primer. But let's look at unit 1. And in unit 1, you'll have your objectives. So if you click on that, you see that the purpose of the first lesson, which I'll go ahead and do since we're looking at that, is to describe neuroscience and its relationship, and I'm not going to read all of these. List the major branches of neuroscience and describe the scope, describe basic neuroanatomical terms, so forth and so on. So in the units, I'll always have an objective. Then what you will go to next is the lesson, and the lesson is where your PowerPoint is, but your PowerPoint is actually a PDF, okay? And so under Unit 1, you'll see the PDF for the lesson on the scope and principles, and then you'll see the lesson for the neurons and associated cells. Now what I want to point out to you are the resources. So if you'll go to resources and you click on this link, Neuroscience for Kids, when you open that, everything we're going to talk about, this gives you definitions. It's easy to read. It's easy to learn. So this is a particular resource for you to review. So I'll say, if I say identification and I say complete Unit 2 Resource 1 and Evaluation 1 activities, I'm telling you just to go to the link and look at the links to see what those resources are. Could everybody open the link? Because all you have to do is do Control and then click. Okay. And so you have another link, and this link is from Medline Plus, and it's the brain and nerves. Okay, but I want you to look. Let me know if you're in the second link from Medline. Let me know if you have clicked that on. Okay. All right, good. What you'll notice is that, look down at the bottom of that. Okay, so go on to Resources, Jenna. Let me come back out. Go on to Resources. And for Lesson 1, when you click on Resources for Lesson 1 in eLearn under the Content section, you will see two links. One is Neuroscience for Kids, and the other one is Brain and Nervous System Topics. Okay, so Jenna, let me know when you see the links. Does everybody else see the links? So you have to be in eLearn and you have to be under the Content section. Okay. Now, again, click on Brain and Nervous System Topics. And then you'll see that if we're talking about a topic, let's say that go down at the bottom where it says Brain and Nerve Topics. Let's say we want to talk about ALS, amyotrophic lateral sclerosis. All you have to do is click on that link, and it tells you what it is. It describes very briefly what it is, and then it gives you some resources and videos that you can watch. So when we're talking about something, or if you are interested in a particular topic, all you have to do is click on this link, and you can find almost any topic. It is arranged alphabetically. Okay, so let's say we want to look at brain hemorrhage. Then you see hemorrhagic stroke. All you got to do is click on that, and it describes it, and it gives you resources. Everybody got it? Okay, so that's what the resources look like. But I want to show you another resource, too. If you go back to, wait a minute, I want to show you another resource for, like, gross anatomy, okay? Well, hold on, because I clicked myself out. Okay, logging back in. Because there's some cool stuff in your course, so I don't want you to like ignore the stuff I put in there. Everybody go to look at the evaluation for Unit 1 just so you can see. And that I'll just tell you in the evaluation lesson 1, complete the review questions on pages 33 and 34 of the Batnagard text. And that's the review lesson at the end of the chapter. Now, I would like for you to go to Unit 2, Gross Anatomy. And what I want you to look at is, what you'll see is Lesson 2. You don't see objectives, but what you will see is Resources 1, Unit 2, Gross Anatomy in the Central Nervous System, Resources 1. So click that on. And then go into the neuroanatomy tutorial labeled images and open that link. And let me know when you have the link open. Excellent, you got it opened. All right, guys, so now click on number 1, External Views. Click on number 1, and you will see brain and spinal cord. There's a picture of the brain and spinal cord, right? So you see, identify the following regions in the image above. So all you have to do is put your cursor on frontal lobe, and you see a red arrow for frontal lobe. Put it on temporal lobe, you see the arrow move. So you guys, do you see that? You see how to use this? Okay. Now go to index and go to the next slide. And you see the spinal cord, but what you see is the dorsal root, the anterior, and the anterior spinal artery. So put your cursor on posterior dorsal root or sensory root. Now put it on anterior ventral motor root, and then put it on the anterior spinal artery. Everybody see what resource you have here? So anything I talk about, go to the next one. So now we want to learn, well, what is a sulcus? Put your cursor on the word sulcus, and it's showing you the indentation deep. Put it on gyrus, and it shows you the raised part of the brain, and then central fissure. So no excuse from my purview for you not to understand or learn structures, because I'm giving you all kinds of resources. You guys got how you use this one? Now, I'm just showing you this. You can go through your resources yourself, because I find a lot of times, like, I put the resources there, but students don't use them. Okay, go to the human forebrain. Click that on. And this just shows you the difference between the human brain and animal brains and things like that. So this is information for you to compare size. And if you go down here, it'll say, now let's slice the monkey brain. I want to know more about these structures and their function, blah, blah, blah. Fun fact. So this is something for you to use. Let me go back to content. And I want you to go now to Gross Anatomy, Unit 2, Gross Anatomy of the Central Nervous System, Resource 2. Click that on. And that's telling you to use your coloring book. But I will tell you in your course outline when you need to color. Okay? All right, so if I go back to content, I want to show you, let's see. I want to show you one more thing, but hold on for 1 minute. Just to show you how to use this. I'm just looking for Evaluation 2. And if you look at Evaluation 2, it tells you what pages to color. That's on the Gross Anatomy, but that's not what I want to show you. I want to show you one more thing. Let me go to the neural bases, maybe? Nope. Yes. See the neural bases of language? So, if you click on about brain injury, okay. And then I need a newer version of a Flash player, so you're going to have to download a newer version of a Flash player. But yeah, you're going to upload your coloring pages in the Dropbox. So you see that what I want you to do is if you have resources to look at, don't ignore the resources. Use the resources. They'll help you, okay? And you've got a brain injury library. I mean, there's all kind of stuff in here. So any questions about the course syllabus or the way the course is designed or structured? Amanda, yes, go ahead.
Are we also turning in the review lessons in the book?
The review lessons, unless I use it like for a grade, then you don't have to turn those in. But if I tell you to do it, like it's on your syllabus, do the identification or review, then do it, and then that gets turned in. We'll go through it in class, but I suggest you do, but I don't want all the review lessons because I don't have time to grade. So what I suggest that you do is that you make a notebook and you put your review lessons, your answers in the notebook, just to help you study. Okay, it's just to help you learn this stuff. Okay, any other questions, guys? Any other questions about the way the course is designed? Everybody good? If you're good, please indicate by saying yes. Okay. All righty then. So, we've gone over the course syllabus. We've looked at the course outline. Now, if you have your outline in front of you, what I'd like for you to do is look at, let me just go back to the table of contents section and open your course outline, please. What I want to point out to you is anything where you see red. Okay, green is identification, so I need you to do an identification activity, okay? Blue means that you need to be coloring. And if you look at identification and coloring for Unit 1, or for the, right under gross anatomy, 624 through 628, that means you have a week to do your identification activities. Now, I'm just telling you to take that period of time and because it will help you with the information that we've already discussed. And I'm telling you that from the 24th through the 28th, you should be coloring those pictures. Now, will I take the notebook up or will I expect you to drop them in the Dropbox? Yes, over a period of time, or I might wait till you come on campus so that you can give them to me. I can check them off and just give them back to you. So even though you may have more time, in order to keep you on track, I've given you a schedule, okay? All right, now you see your first quiz is also on 6/28, and it's from 5:30 to 6:30 p.m., and it will be in, I guess, I don't know, when is the 28th? If I misspoke a date, then I will make a correction. Oh, yeah, the 28th is a Wednesday, so yes, that's when your quiz is. Okay. Yes, the due date, you have, I'm just saying begin the thing on the 24th, and by that next Wednesday, you should have completed it. So if, for example, I say to you, okay, guys, I want you to go ahead and put your coloring book pages in so I can go ahead and check those off, then they would have to go in on the 28th, okay? No. You are probably absolutely correct about quiz 2 if, let me see. No. Well, let me see where it is. Yeah, that should be 7. That should be 7. It's not, that date is wrong. So I need to change that. So quiz thing, and I am so sorry. What I did, was to cut and paste quiz 1 in there and then change the information, but I forgot to change the date. So quiz 2 would actually be probably on 7, what? Let me look. You would have done, it's going to be on chapters 3, 13, 7, 8, 11, lessons 4, 5, and 6. Okay, so quiz 2 is probably going to be at the beginning of the class on the very next period. And if I look at my schedule, all right, quiz 2 is going to be on the probably on 26th. It'll be before we do the lectures, so that should be the 26th. Yeah. Okay, well, the thing is that what will happen is this. The final exam will probably be, if it's proctored, it will be on the same night as the class. Well, actually, we have to talk about the final exam because you got to be at a site to take the final exam. Okay? And that being said, we might need to even talk about the midterm. The midterm can be, well, actually, if you can go somewhere on that Wednesday and take it, or you have Wednesday, Thursday, Friday to take it, it's no big deal to me. Because it's going to be proctored, so that means you have to go to a site to take it, okay? And but if you come into TSU, it would have to be on a Saturday. So good, I'm glad that you pointed that out, okay? All right, you can see that your midterm is going to be on the 12th, 5:30 to 6:45 p.m., must be proctored. So that being said, we have to look at a time period as to when you can go to a testing site. Because I can't proctor you without being in front of you. So it doesn't have to, this also to note, in the midterm, it won't necessarily be on a Wednesday unless it's a Wednesday afternoon, or it could be Thursday, it could be Friday. We don't have classes on Friday. Whenever your testing site says you can take it, so I will give you a time period for the midterm. Okay. Did somebody raise their hand? No?
Yes, ma'am.
And if you're in that, oh, that's good. You'll be in Nashville. Well, that's great. Then it'll be proctored, and we can just do it on Wednesday. Okay, who's talking?
I'm sorry, I had my hand raised, but then Rachel asked the question that I was going to with regards to speech camp.
Yeah, if you're here, then it'll just be right here in the classroom. So it'll be proctored. So it'll be great. That'll be, in fact, that's wonderful. Yes, it'll be proctored. It'll be on that day. Okay. So the final is the one that you really have to get your proctors for, because the midterm you'll be here unless for some reason you're not in camp. All right. Okay, thank you so much for pointing that out. Okay. You can see down at the bottom, just before final exam, you have in brown your guest lecturer, and Dr. Thompson you will come to class in Blackboard Collaborate, and he will do his presentation in Blackboard Collaborate. Okay? So, Allie H?
So for quiz 1, which is 28th, we won't be in Nashville. Will we
no, quiz 1 doesn't have to, the quiz 1, they doesn't have to be proctored.
Okay, so then we'll just get on the quiz, and then class will start at 6:30?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Class will probably start at 6:40.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. Uh-huh. Okay, are there any other questions? Everybody understand? the course outline. And thank you again for pointing out. Please make the date change to 7/26 for quiz 2. Okay. All righty then. Okay, Whitney?
So I just want to be clear on the identification items. There's nothing we need to like record that we did it to turn in. It's just
no. It's just for you to learn. I'm just telling you that that's the time. That would be a good time for you to go in and do it. Okay. Now what you will have to turn in, let's say, would be the neuroanatomy primer, because I have to give you credit for that. And that means that I will check off to see that you colored each and every one of those pages. Okay? And let's see. Look at Unit 3. Resource. Yes. Let's see. Angela? Go ahead. Angela? You have the floor.
Sorry, I forgot to turn on. Do we have anything for ePortfolio for this class?
You can actually put some of your coloring into ePortfolio to show that now listen, you can't put all of your coloring in, but I might take like a page from each one of those sections, one for vascular, one for whatever, and just put it in. And you can also put, if I asked you to do like the first review questions, you could actually put those review questions in if you want to. Okay. And I would like for you to do a reflection for this class as well, and that will be due the last day of class, but I'll remind you of that. Any other questions? Jenna?
Are you open to doing study sessions or tests?
Oh, I certainly would be happy to do study sessions for you. We just would have to find an agreeable time, and it's no big deal. Absolutely. Anybody else? Okay, so if everybody's good, then it is 6:55, and I would like to begin my lecture, but I'm going to give you a break, and then we will come back and start with our first lesson, which is Chapter 1, Essential Neurological Concepts and Principles. So, we're going to do the first PowerPoint, okay? So let's say we take a break until about 7:10. Let's see, 7:10, is that enough time for you to grab something to eat? 7:15, that gives you a 15-minute break. I don't like to go longer than that, but go to the bathroom and then grab something to eat. So what are we doing, 7:10 or 7:15? 7:10? Okay, 7:10 it is. I'll see you at 7:10. Okay, students, it is 7:10. If you're back, please indicate by letting me know, typing yes. Okay, so I think the majority of you are back. Maybe everyone. So I'll give about 1 minute. And while we're waiting, if somebody is still not back, I said at the beginning of the class session that I wanted you to tell me if you knew someone who may have had or has a brain injury. And so if you do and you're willing to share, I want you to think about that person and what are some of the things that you notice about the way the person behaves now in terms of communication, skills, any noticeable differences, anything physically different that you notice about the person that's different than what they were like before the injury. So anybody know anybody with a brain injury? If so, indicate by saying yes. And then raise your hand if you're willing to share. Okay. Good, a couple of people. So, okay, Lakin, we'll start with you. Tell us about, you don't have to, please don't give any identifying information because of HIPAA and FERPA, but also tell us about the person you know. All right, go ahead.
Yes, the person I know had a stroke many years ago, and now that person has dementia. And one thing I noticed about that person is that they have a very hard time with word retrieval.
Okay.
And they are losing, like, the further along that they get, the more things that they're not able to do anymore.
Okay, excellent. Thank you for sharing. All right, somebody else. Anybody else willing to share? And if so, raise your hand. Okay, why don't I share? My grandmother, and I am talking about my grandmother, she has passed, but she had a massive stroke many, many, many years ago. As a result of the stroke, well, she had diabetes, she had heart problems, and she had hypertension. So she was a ticking bomb waiting to happen. And she had 3, again, massive strokes. The third one was just horrible. As a result of her stroke, she could no longer talk. She had problems swallowing, so she had dysphagia. I'm not sure if she could understand. Sometimes I'd say, Grandma, if you could understand, squeeze my hand. And the response was so inconsistent that I can't really say that she could understand. And in that case, she would be what I consider to be someone more like having a global aphasia. Okay, which means she couldn't understand and she couldn't talk. Okay, and so that being said, I knew that the middle cerebral artery was involved and the areas from the frontal lobe around to the temporal lobe just massively damaged. Okay, anybody else? Anybody else know somebody with some type of brain injury? And can you tell us what you think about their communication now? Chelsea.
Okay, can you hear me?
I can.
Okay. Well, the person I know, I don't know them directly, but the supervising SLP that I work with, her son had a car accident, and he has a very severe traumatic brain injury, and he has, like, really bad seizures and everything that he has to take medication for, and, like, has problems remembering things and stuff like that. And so I know it's been really hard for her since he had that happen, but I don't know him, like, personally real well. But
okay. Good. Thank you for sharing. So we've talked about somebody with a stroke, TBI, and dementia. Okay, go ahead. Chelsea? Did you raise your hand again?
I just forgot to unraise it, sorry.
Oh, okay. All right, and so those are three different areas of the brain. The young man in the car accident with the traumatic brain injury, depending on the area of the brain that was hit, but more than likely frontal lobe. It could be also the lateral part of the frontal lobe or the anterior part of the frontal lobe. And if that's the case, we could expect that he would have problems with memory, executive function, reasoning, inhibition of inappropriate behavior, so many personality disorders, so many different things that we would see. The person with dementia probably has some changes that are going on in the cellular structure, and if that's the case, then as time goes on, the person will get progressively worse and eventually won't be able to remember. The person with aphasia, depending on the type of aphasia, may have problems, is going to have problems with language, and that would encompass receptive and expressive language. But memory may not be affected. It depends on the extent of the damage. Most of the time, somebody with aphasia may have problems with word recall, so forth and so on, but they look different than somebody with dementia versus somebody with traumatic brain injury. If somebody has a right hemisphere problem, you're not going to see problems with the language, receptive and expressive language, in the sense that they have difficulty talking or understanding, but you'll see problems with higher order language behavior, such as their ability to understand metaphor, proverbs, jokes. They would be very literal depending on where the damage is. They may have difficulty recognizing, or they may deny that they have an illness, even though they may have some paralysis. They may not even associate that body part as being theirs. They can't move it, but they may not think it belongs to them. They may have problems recognizing faces. They may have problems with neglecting things on the left side or the right side. So the brain is an interesting thing. Yeah, I mean, it's just very interesting, and I love studying it. So what we got to do in this first lesson is just learn some basic terminology. So first, we're going to talk about the word neuro and then science, neuroscience. Well, neuroscience is the study of the anatomical structures of the brain. So the structures being things like what? The lobes, the tracts, okay, the brainstem, so forth and so on. The cellular function, so we have different types of cells that do different things. So we have glia cells, we have astrocytes, ependymal type of cells. So we're going to learn about the cellular, the different types of cells and the function of those cells. Some cells are there to help get rid of debris and to engulf debris and to move it along, to destroy viruses, things like that. Other cells are there to support brain function, so we'll talk about that. So neuroscience is the study of not only the names of the structures, but the types of cells and what those cells are used for. It's also the study of the physiological processes of the nervous system. So what are the functions of those structures that we are going to learn? Okay. So here's an example of structures. And let's see if I can point. Well, I'll just do this. Okay. So this frontal area here, this is a structure. This is called the frontal lobe. And I'm coloring it in yellow. So let me know that you can see my yellow pen. Okay, good. As opposed, here's a structure. Okay, if we look at this area here that I'm coloring, wait a minute, let's see. I'm going to color this in purple. but it's pink on purple, so that's not good. If you look at that area there, can you see me coloring this purple? I want to make sure that you can see it. Okay, some people can, yes. That area I colored purple is a structure called the thalamus, okay? And that's part of the diencephalon. Here's another structure. So, neuroscience, the study of structure. Here is the pons. I'm coloring that green, okay? And right above it, and I'm coloring that green, is the midbrain. And right below the pons is I'm coloring this green as well, is the medulla oblongata. Okay. And those I think are very familiar. But if we look at this black stuff, which I'm coloring aqua, this is called the reticular formation. It runs throughout the brainstem, okay? So when we talk about neuroscience, we're talking about the study of structures. You can see the cerebellum, the occipital lobe, and the parietal lobe. And I can name many more structures in here. But they also name those structures for you. Hypothalamus, olfactory bulb, pituitary gland. So the study of structures. Here are the different types of cells that we were talking about, the study of cellular structure. So astrocyte, the astrocyte is in green, okay? But then you have an oligodendrocyte. The oligodendrocyte I'm circling here. The oligodendrocyte is important for developing myelin, which I'm coloring, in the central nervous system. So myelin coats the axon in the central nervous system, and it helps with transmission, the speed of transmission. Okay? So myelin is just a fatty substance, but it is oligodendrocytes that are responsible for development of myelin that goes around the axon. So then you have a microglia. Microglia engulfs debris within the brain. So I'm coloring that in blue too. All right, so we're going to learn about the cellular structure, and then, of course, there is always function. So neuroscience describes how the brain regulates higher mental function and produces action. Okay, higher mental functions would be cognitive skills that we all have. That's a higher order function of the brain. So your ability to think about something, to, let's say you want to think about, how am I going to buy a new car? So the higher mental skills that you use to figure that out are part of what is described in neuroscience. Like, for example, the brain is functioning appropriately, so now that I want to buy the car. So what I have to do is research where I'm going to buy the car from, how much it costs. I have to look at, you know, the type of engine it has, what the interior looks like, how I'm going to come up with the money to get the car, or how I'm going to finance the car, so forth and so on. So I'm using reasoning, I'm using executive functioning, and all of those skills that are important. I'm using memory to help me come up or to be able to carry out the action of buying a car. So when we talk about neuroscience, it describes how the brain regulates higher mental function and produces action. It also describes the normal anatomy and physiology, and that makes it possible for you as a speech-language pathologist to identify disorder, because if you know what's normal, then you know when something is disordered. And it also describes the physiological correlates of language, gestures, cognition, and speech. So neuroscience, the study of the structure, the function, and the cellular, the different types of cells, and how you use those things to produce actions. Okay, any question about what neuroscience is? And if you have a question, make sure that you stop me. All you have to do is raise your hand. Now, let's look at speech-language pathology. Okay, speech is the verbal component of communication. And speech includes articulation, or how we use the articulators, which would be our teeth, our tongue, our hard palate, soft palate, so forth and so on, to produce sounds. Okay? Sounds are produced verbally, so that is, speech is the verbal component of communication. Voice consists of three different areas: the loudness, the pitch, and the quality. That's all a part of speech. So, for example, I'm speaking at a pitch that is normal for me, I think, as a female, and I am varying my intonation by using rising and falling pitch. I'm also speaking at, I think, a normal level of intensity. So all of these things are characteristics of voice. And I also am not hypernasal or hyponasal, so the quality of my voice, I think, is okay. Now, you guys might disagree with that. But when we talk about speech, we're talking about how we use articulators to produce sounds, how we modulate our voice by talking either loud or soft. We use good quality or poor quality, and we either have a high pitch or a low pitch. Fluency refers to the rhythm of the speech. So the rhythm is the intonation, it's the prosody, it's the rising and falling of the inflections that are used. All those things are things that we look at when we talk about speech. So any disorder of speech would mean that the person cannot produce particular sounds because they have a problem with the motor production of articulation, such as I can't say the k sound as in cat. I always say the t sound as in two for k as in cat. So that's disorder. Okay? Voice, if my voice is too high or too low, the pitch is too high or too low, speaking too softly or too loud, or if I have a voice that's horrible to listen to, that's disorder. Fluency is the rhythm, so if I don't speak in a manner where I'm not constantly repeating myself or hesitating or prolonging, then fluency is okay. But if I do those things like constant repetitions, prolongations, so forth and so on, then I have a problem with stuttering or cluttering if I'm speaking too fast. So a speech disorder would be problems with articulation, voice, and fluency. With language, can anybody tell me what form is in language? Because you guys just took language development. What is form, content, and use? Somebody, what is form? Or either you guys can type it if you don't raise your hand. Okay, syntax will be form. That's one part of form. What else is part of form? Okay, morphology is a part of form. And what else is a part of form? Phonology, and phonology is the study of language. So those three subsystems relate to form. It's how we use the sounds, how we put the sounds together to produce words, okay, how we use prefixes, suffixes, or infixes to change meaning, so that's from morphology, and how we put the words together to produce sentences, and then how we use transformation in those sentences to form questions, to negate a question, or to negate a statement, so forth and so on. What is content? Content is semantics. It relates to the meaning. Okay? Good. And we could have word meaning. We could have multiple meanings, sentence meaning. For example, if I were to say to you, visiting relatives can be fun, what does that mean? Anybody? You can raise your hand if you want. Visiting relatives can be fun. And you really would have to talk if you could think of that. Just think about that statement. Visiting relatives can be fun. What does that mean? Okay, Angela.
It could mean that you just enjoy visiting your family.
Okay, that's one meaning. Is there another meaning? Jenna.
It could mean that the relatives that are visiting are fun.
Exactly. So that is an ambiguous statement. Visiting relatives can be fun has two meanings. So content allows us to study meaning. Okay. All right, and it allows us to look at ambiguity, like that is an ambiguous statement, or it allows us to look at anomaly, like I said something but it doesn't make sense at all. Okay, it allows us to look at multiple meanings, like blue could be the color blue, or it could be like you blowing something, or it could be like a feeling blue. Okay, so that's content. And then what is use? Use is pragmatics, okay? And so an example of use would be me saying, let's see, Joshua's eating a hamburger. And I'm right there with him, sitting next to him. And without calling his name, I said, boy, I sure am hungry. What am I doing? What am I doing? I said, well, okay, Whitney, what am I doing?
You're probably insinuating you'd like some.
Exactly. I'm actually telling Joshua, I'm hungry. Give me some of your hamburger. But did I make a direct request to get that hamburger? No. It was an indirect request. And I'm his professor. So I'm hoping that he will look at my authority and say, I sure don't want to give her any of my hamburger. However, she is my professor, so maybe, just maybe, she'll let me retake a test or something if I'm nice to her. Okay, so that's pragmatics. Okay, so if we have a problem with language, we're talking about a problem with the form, the content, or the use. So when we talk about speech pathology, we're talking about pathology means disease, ology means the study of, so we're talking about the study of disorder of verbal communication, of the form, the content, and the use. It could be of the fluency or the voice, and if we're talking about hearing, then we're talking about the fact that the person, for some reason, has either a conductive loss, maybe the child has put something in his or her ear, and so it is occluding his or her ability to hear. Maybe that can be corrected. Maybe the person has otitis media, or it could be that the person has a inner ear loss or a brain damage where you have the auditory nerve affected. If we're talking about swallowing, that's a person who's choking, if we're talking about disorder. So we said neuroscience is the study of structure and function and cells and how they work. And speech-language pathology is the study of disordered speech, language, hearing, or swallowing. So those things are important for us understanding what is the relationship between neuroscience and speech and communication. Okay? We know that as speech-language pathologists, we're going to be working with persons who have either developmental developmental disorders of cognition, language, or speech, or they have an acquired disorder. Now, if they have an acquired disorder, we're going to assume that what? They developed normally. Well, we know they developed normally. Everything was going fine. They had good speech. They had good language, probably good hearing, swallowing, and then something happened. Maybe a car accident. Just like, we talked about earlier. As a result of a car accident, the person now has a problem with cognition, so that means that they may have problems with memory, they may have problems with executive functioning, reasoning, inhibiting inappropriate behavior, so forth and so on. Or it could be a problem with language. Depending on the area of the brain that was affected, the person may have difficulty putting words together to say sentences, and or even comprehending sentences or words or sounds, so forth and so on. And if it's speech, then we know that, and it's acquired, it's probably a motor speech disorder. So now the problem is, like when we think of Muhammad Ali. Muhammad Ali had Parkinson's, but of course he was a boxer, and not wearing protective headgear, and he's getting pounded over and over and over and over and over in the head region. Well, he ended up with Parkinson's, but his speech was slow, it was slurred, it was difficult to understand. So the verbal output as it relates to him resulted from muscular weakness that caused him to have consistent errors with speech sounds. So, and a lot of distortion, okay? And so we would say that he has a motor speech disorder called dysarthria as a result of brain damage, okay? Now, if it's a developmental disorder, you can have brain damage developmentally. Okay, and that means that the person is born with the problem from the beginning. Okay, so these are the domains of speech and language. So let's see how they relate neurologically to our understanding of the brain. We had a scientist named Paul Broca, and we also had one named Carl Wernicke. And in the 1800s, they actually were studying the brain of persons or people who died. And so tau is that famous person that Broca studied. And what they observed, both of them, was that there was a connection between lesions in certain anatomical structures of the brain, which is neuroscience. So they were looking at the anatomy of the brain, and then they were looking at function. And what they found was that, okay, upon death, the guy who had Broca's aphasia had difficulty expressing himself. He could not talk probably in more than one or two word utterances. And so there was a problem or a deficit in spoken language. But he also noticed that the area of the brain that was damaged was in the frontal lobe, was in the inferior, posterior part of the frontal lobe in the third gyrus. And so he associated damage to that area with the problem that what this subject exhibited with spoken language. Wernicke, on the other hand, noted that, well, upon autopsy, my guy could talk. He was very gregarious. He may not have said things that made sense all the time, but what he absolutely could not do was understand. And he noted that the lesion was in the temporal lobe, in the superior gyrus of the temporal lobe, back toward the posterior part of the superior gyrus. Now, they had no motor speech problems like apraxia or dysarthria, but hence began the relationship between the brain and what we know about communication. Okay, and so remember that the brains of the subjects were examined on autopsy. And even now, like when you say someone has Alzheimer's disease, yes, there are various signs and symptoms that you can associate with that, but, you know, most of the time it's diagnosed on autopsy. And so what they're looking for is the plaque and the neurofibrillary tangles. And those are the things that define in the cellular structure what we know today as autism, along with other types of things such as tau protein. So we know that there's a relationship between the brain and communication. So as an SLP, you have to understand the function of the brain and the problems that occur when there's damage to certain areas of the brain so that you can diagnose what you're looking at appropriately. You can use differential diagnosis and then you'll know how to treat. So any questions about that? Because now you're looking at Broca's area, which is in the frontal lobe, and remember I said it was in the third convolution of the frontal lobe, okay? And so you can see this area here is like the third convolution area of the frontal lobe. There is the motor strip. This is motor. So the person hangs upside down on this motor strip with the head and the face being close to Broca's area, okay, and the legs going over into the very top of the brain, into the longitudinal fissure. Broca's area is in the frontal lobe, and any damage to this area, you can kind of predict what you're going to see. You're going to see problems with fluency, so the person is probably only using 1 or 2 word utterances on average. That person is going to have problems naming. So if I say, what is this? They may not be able to name that object immediately. They're going to have problems with repetition. So if I say, repeat what I say, it is sunny outside, that person may have problems with repetition. And then comprehension is not going to be any problem. They are going to understand. So language will be a problem, but comprehension will not. On the other hand, in Wernicke's area, which is here, in the posterior superior temporal lobe, they're going to have very fluent speech, which means they might be able to use 4 to 5 word utterances. Okay? Now, they may use nonsensical types of utterances because in Wernicke's area, the temporal lobe is important for comprehension of spoken language, particularly if it's on the left side of the brain. So, if I'm an individual who's just met somebody who is talking, using 4 to 5 word sentences, but they have difficulty comprehending, but they don't seem to know that they have difficulty comprehending, I'm more than likely talking to somebody with Wernicke's aphasia, and I can think about the fact that, okay, well, so the damage is in the temporal lobe. So this is the superior temporal lobe, this is the middle temporal lobe, gyrus, and this is the inferior. Can you see me drawing SMI? Does everybody see that? Okay, so what I would probably say is, well, this person appears to have Broca's aphasia. That means the damage is going to be in the posterior area of the superior temporal lobe, with the anterior area being close. You see A meaning anterior, being close to the frontal lobe, and P meaning posterior, being close to the occipital lobe. So, okay. All right, so that's why it's so important to understand what is the relationship between the brain and your ability to communicate. And I'm also going to know that it is on the left side, because the left side of the brain is the language side. Now, not everybody has language in the left side of the brain. 5% of people have language in the right side of the brain. Okay. So, as a result of Broca's and Wernicke's observation, language and speech disturbances have become sensitive indicators of structural and physiological impairment in the brain. Therefore, these indicators have been helpful in showing a relationship between neuroscience and speech and hearing and language pathology. Does everybody understand that? Does everybody understand that? Good. So as a speech-language pathologist, it's very important that you listen to how people are communicating, how they're using the verbal speech component as well as what their language skills are like. And you also need to be able to look at their movement and look at their facial symmetry and things like that to figure out whether or not you have some type of neurological injury occurring. Okay? And so here's a nice picture of the brain. And when we start thinking about the brain, what we're trying to show you is the different structures, like, for example, the primary motor cortex, which is this orange part here, is important for voluntary movement. In other words, think about a jungle gym. You guys know what a jungle gym is? That might be I might be dating my age. But you climb up on it, yeah, and then you hang. How many of you guys, like, have been on one and then you've hung upside down from the jungle gym? Do you remember in, I don't know, those playgrounds where they have the ladder that you would climb up and then you would, oh my gosh, Brittany, you fell off and broke your elbow. Oh, that's awful. Okay. Well, think about the fact that, let's do this. You might have if you hang upside down with your legs, your knees, the top of the brain here, let me put it with a color that would, maybe yellow. Okay. Well, that's worse. Maybe these colors are, maybe a dark blue. Okay, I don't know. But at the top of think about your knees hanging over the top of the motor strip and going down in the longitudinal fissure. And here's your body. And then when you get down here, here's your face and your tongue. So you're hanging upside down on this motor strip. So if I have damage to the motor strip, let's say the hands are up in this area and the arms. If I have damage up in this area, then I won't be able to move my hands or my arms. So when we talk about voluntary movement, we're talking about the fact that this whole strip is motor, and any damage to any body part, as you think about the way it's laying on the strip, causes problem with voluntary movement. And then, of course, we can look at other structures, but this is an example of function and structure. Yes, Kendra, go ahead.
On the motor strip, is that bilateral, so will our head be on both sides, or is it just one side and then our feet hang over?
No, it's both sides. It's both sides.
Thank you.
And the other thing is, remember that this thing is motor, this primary motor cortex, but here on the opposite side, I'm so sorry, I'm eating a piece of something. I'm chewing. I'm hungry. I'm hungry. So if I'm chewing in your ears, I do apologize. Okay. On this somatosensory cortex, this thing is all sensory. Now maybe I need to use yellow or red or something. Okay. This is all sensory here. But guess what? The man is still hanging upside down on the motor strip. Okay? So here's the head down here again, and here's the tongue. So this is called the gustatory cortex because, you know, it's sensory, so taste. The tongue is used for taste here, but the tongue over here on the motor cortex is used for speech. Now, here's the thing. Any damage to any part of the body as it hangs down on the sensory strip means that I won't be able to feel that part of the body. So let's say I have a lesion that cuts across, well, give me a nice color. I don't know what I'm doing. Okay. A lesion that cuts straight across the motor and the sensory area. Let's say at the level of where the hands or the arms are. Not only won't I be able to move my arms, but I won't be able to feel anything in my arms. So knowing the structure of the brain is very important. Yes, Michelle.
Okay, so this picture that we're looking at right now, is this the left side of our brain that controls the right side of our body?
Yep.
Okay, so therefore, if it affected the left side, then our right, if it was our...
You got it. You're saying it right.
Then our right side arm would be affected.
That's right. The right side arm, and yes, the right side arm would be affected. If that lesion cut is only in the motor strip, you could feel something to the arm because the sensory strip is fine, but you would not be able on the right side to be able to move the arm.
To move it, correct.
Okay?
Okay, good. Thank you.
Everybody got it? So here, if the lesion is there, I'm not going to be able to, language is going to be an issue. So the, you know, my ability to put together words, so the syntax, all of that is going to be affected. If it's like here, Wernicke's area, I can talk. I'm probably going to use a lot of nonsense sentences, some of them, because remember, they're not understanding, and they're happy as a lark. So comprehension of speech is going to be affected, and particularly if it's on the left-hand side, because the left side is the speech and language side, but the right side is the visual, spatial, artistic side. So if that lesion in Wernicke's area occurred on the right side of the brain in the same spot, I would not be able to understand environmental sounds. Like, for example, like in my office right now, the heater is humming, okay? I wouldn't understand what that was, or a siren going by. I wouldn't understand what that was. But in the left hemisphere, I can't understand speech or language. I can't understand the verbal code. I don't understand what those words mean. So the left side of the brain is the speech and language function. The right side is the more artistic, visual, spatial, temporal types of higher order language skills and so forth. Okay, so this is just giving you an example of the relationship between speech and language and neurology. Okay. Now, the other thing is, in this back area of the brain here, where I, whatever. Okay, I'm so sorry. Changing my colors. Let me do this red. In this back area of the brain here, right here, and back here, this is the angular gyrus, the lower one, where you got the middle temporal, angular gyrus and supramarginal gyrus. Guess what they're important for? Reading and writing. So the left side is the language part of the brain. Okay? All right, so that's just to give you an illustration of those terms: neuroscience, speech-language pathology, What is the relationship between the two? But we have different branches of neuroscience. We have neurology, neurosurgery, so forth and so on. Okay, so what we're going to do is learn these terminologies. And you need to know the terminologies. Now, if you read Chapter 1, well, when you read Chapter 1, not if you read Chapter 1, because you are responsible for reading everything I talk about. And believe me, I will ask you, okay? But the thing about the branches of neuroscience, if you look at Table 1.1 on page 4, if you have a book, the branches are given to you as well as the definition. So no excuse for you not knowing the definition because it's in the book and it's on the PowerPoint. So neurology is the study of the nervous system and diseases that disrupt its normal structural and physiological properties. So if you look at Table 1.2 on page 5, they give you an example of major brain diseases. So, for example, hemorrhaging at the brain, bleeding. Something happens, a blood vessel bursts. Maybe you have high blood pressure. And if you have high blood pressure, it's the silent killer. But what it's causing is that blood to pump against that, artery just at a great amount of force. And so let's say that the pressure gets so high that the artery starts ballooning out and then it just bursts, just like blowing up a balloon. So hemorrhaging is an example of a vascular disorder, and vascular refers to the blood, okay? Something with blood running through it, and that's an artery, okay? So neurology is the study of these different types of diseases, okay? You could have a neoplastic condition, and that means that you have this kind of benign, or you have a malignant tumor that just grows and it depresses part of the brain. A degenerative condition would be something like Alzheimer's disease. The Alzheimer's disease is what we see that occurs more in elderly populations, and obviously cognition is going to be affected because they're going to lose their memory, and over a period of time they may even they may be talking, in the earlier stages of this, but as the disease gets progressively worse, memory is going to go and they're not going to talk. A motor disorder such as Parkinson's disease. Parkinson's disease occurs when we have a problem with the substantia nigra, which is part of the midbrain of the brainstem. And the substantia nigra makes a neurochemical called dopamine. And so the dopamine becomes depleted. It just goes away. And what happens, it causes a movement disorder like what we saw with Muhammad Ali. That means, shuffle gait type of walking, tremor at rest, very soft speech, everything becomes small. So writing becomes very small, everything. So that's a motor disorder. We could have a deficiency disorder like Korsakoff syndrome. And so Korsakoff syndrome actually occurs when we have problems with thalamin deficiency. And this occurs when people drink too much. If you're a chronic alcoholic, then you're going to have thalamin deficiency, and then you'll see problems with psychosis. You're not going to have good memory, so forth and so on. It could be bacterial or viral infections such as meningitis that affects, there's a virus or bacteria that affects the meninges. The meninges are the covering of the brain, and when that happens, that's going to occur. It's going to affect both the the left side of the brain and the right side of the brain, because the meninges cover the complete brain. So it's the outer layer coverings that become infected. And then I had a friend whose child had meningitis. And he was about 4 when he got it. It's highly contagious. Another child in the daycare had it. And this kid had to learn how to walk again. He actually had to learn how to sit up. He had to learn how to crawl, walk. He had to learn how to talk again. So, and then, of course, epileptic types of disorder. And epilepsy occurs when we have problems with the electrical activity in the brain, or we have seizures. So neurology is the study of the nervous system and diseases that disrupt normal structural or physiological properties. And these are some of the diseases that you can see, just to name a few. This is an example of the lady hemorrhaging, and I'll just point it out by, there's the hemorrhage. You can see that here's the artery, there's the middle cerebral artery, and the artery just simply bursts. And so she's bleeding in the brain. That's neurology, the study of disease. So here's another example of a hemorrhage down here of the middle cerebral artery, but this is just a different viewpoint. And here's an example of an actual hemorrhage. This is a subarachnoid hemorrhage. So you can see that this blood here has pooled, and it has thickened, it has clotted, but this is the arachnoid, is the covering, the meninges are the covering, and you have the outermost layer that attaches to the skull, and that is the dura mater. Mater means mother. And then you have the arachnoid, which is in between the dura mater, and then you have the pia mater that actually attaches to the brain. So this is an example of subarachnoid hemorrhage. So this is an example of neurology. What is neurology? The study of the structures and function in their diseases. Okay. This is an example of a brain tumor. And if you look, you can see this tumor is in the frontal lobe of the brain. Okay? So there it is right there. All right, so, and it's in the anterior part of the brain too, in the frontal part. So he's gonna have some problems with probably executive functioning, memory, so forth and so on. Okay, so just giving you examples of different types of disorders that we see when we study neurology. Here's an example of what we see in Alzheimer's disease. We have these neurofibrillary tangles here, these things right here, and then you have also amyloid plaques that are part of what we see in Alzheimer's disease. And usually this is diagnosed at death, during autopsy. But you can see also what normal neurons look like. Again, we're talking about neurology, the study of the brain's function and structure and its disease. Okay. So any questions about neurology and what that means? Okay. Good. All righty. Then let's look at neurosurgery. And this is surgical intervention to treat a disease. So, like, the disease that we saw was a clot in the frontal lobe. Again, the study of neurology. But in neurosurgery, the goal is to figure out, well, what do I do with the clot? How do I get rid of it? So they're going to have to remove it. And so they will extract it surgically as much as possible without trying to damage the surrounding brain tissue. Or if there's a vascular aneurysm, the neurosurgeon or in many cases, it's the radiologist that may go in and tie off the area that's ballooning to keep blood from going. They may put some kind of chemical in there or some type of material in there to keep the blood from causing more force to go into that area that's ballooning out and causing it to burst. Or they could do something like remove plaque, like a lot of times, like if somebody has a heart attack or something, or they have a stroke, it might be because they have a buildup of what we call plaque in the artery. And so it's just fatty material that's like clogging up the artery, so the blood begins to back up. And so, but that can be removed. So removal of carotid arterial plaque. And so this next slide actually shows that. So here, look at what the surgeon is taking out of this artery. Here is the artery. That's the normal part of the artery. But now what he has done is done an incision here, and here he's removing this fat. And this fat is blocking the artery and causing blood to back up. Okay? So can everybody see that? Okay. Good. All right, so no questions about surgery, I guess. And there is the carotid artery plaque that was removed. Isn't that amazing? Oh, wow. Well, the thing is my dad, God rest his soul, died in August, this past August. He had what did he have? He had lung disease. I can't even think of it right now because it's so traumatic. But the point is, when you looked at his arteries too, I mean, he had like 50% blockage in the arteries, and I was like, okay. That's a lot of blockage. So that means half of the artery is blocked, which means that the blood is slow to get around that plaque. And so, but of course he's 85 and nobody's going to, and thank you so much guys, nobody is going to recommend that, you know, the plaque be removed because he was in poor health. He had pulmonary fibrosis, which was a death sentence in itself. And so, but can you imagine? That's why you have to watch your diet. And I like a lot of salt. And I like to cook with, you know, bacon grease and stuff like that. So all of that stuff gets into the arteries and it builds up plaque and fat and all of that. So, but anyway, that's my lecture for tonight. This is neurosurgery. Okay. So now neuroanatomy is the structural elements of the nervous system only. So if we're talking about anatomy, we're talking about what are the structures. So you have your neurons, you have fiber tracts. Fiber tracts are the axons of the neuron. And that tract could run from the cerebral cortex down through the spinal cord out to some type of organ or some type of muscle or whatever. You have nerves, you have the ventricular structures. In the ventricles, you have cerebral spinal fluid. You have the vascular networks of the blood supply. You have the meninges, and that's the covering of the brain. So all of these are structures. So here's an example of a structure. This is a neuron, and a neuron has a cell body. This area here in the middle, which I'm coloring blue, is the nucleus. And in that nucleus we have DNA, and then we also have a nucleolus, which has RNA in it. You have dendrites, which receive messages, and then you have this axon, which goes away from the cell body. And then you have these terminal boutons, which have neurochemicals in them. Okay, so that's an example of a structure. Neuroradiology is the use of emission or transmission imaging to identify intact and pathological structures of the nervous system. So these are the types of assessments that Harold will talk to you about, okay? Everybody has had an x-ray, so you pretty much know what that is, but angiography. What happens with angiography is generally the radiologist will take a catheter, and he will insert the catheter into the groin area, and he'll go up into this blood vessel, and he will take that catheter and you know, just keep traveling with it up to the aorta area of the heart, and then he might hook up from the aorta area and go into the internal carotid, which we'll talk about these arteries, and then go into the brain to see what's happening. You have computed tomography, which they look at. Usually with computed tomography, you're doing a scan of the head only, but with MRI, you may be doing a scan. You can do a scan of the whole body. But MRI, you really have to be careful that you don't have any magnets on you or any metal or anything like that that could cause objects to fly into the machine and cause you harm or even kill you. And then they have SPECT, and then they have PET. So these are different types of radiological procedures that the radiologist does for imaging. So remember I talked to you about angiography, and here's the catheter being inserted here and going in the groin area, and then it's coming on up into the aortic area, and he can come out of that and then go right on up into the neck area, and from the neck area go right on up into the head. Okay? All right, so this is the aorta here, and you can see this is the aorta here, and you can see there is the catheter there. Again, if you can't see my drawing, then let me know. So this is what we call angiography. Can everybody see that? Okay. Now you say, well, why, pray tell, why would they go down here and start at the groin area? Well, if they go directly to the neck area here, the internal carotid is a bleeder. So if they accidentally nick something, that thing will just gush out blood, and it's just not better. It's better to start. Now, I'm not a radiologist, so that's a good question to ask my cousin Harold. But basically, I don't think that, I think that going into the internal carotid might be a higher risk of, that person bleeding more. Okay. This is an example of MRI, so you can see the 3D imaging here. So this is what radiologists do. Actually, it's a beautiful picture of the brain. So there is your, cerebellum. Look at your midbrain, pons, medulla. This is the diencephalon, the thalamus, hypothalamus. This is the corpus callosum, septum pellucidum, cingulate gyrus. So, just a beautiful, beautiful picture of the brain. And if you see, a lot of times with these MRIs, anything white denotes blood in that area. Okay? Well, he'll tell you about all of that. Okay. Any questions thus far, guys? Anybody ever had a CAT scan done? Okay, Kendra. And Adriana. Is that correct? Yeah. Amanda, good. So, Adrian is your twin sister, ha. Okay. So, in this CAT scan, then they only did your head, right? You had an angiogram as well? Wow, that's pretty cool. Well, I think I've had a CT and an MRI, never an angiography. Oh, just thinking about somebody sticking a catheter in me. Of course, I'm assuming that they're numbing that area, and you must be somewhat, you know, medicated or what? Anesthetized. I can't even say it. Okay, very good. All right, so let's talk about neuroembryology. That deals with the growth of the nervous system. It's how the nervous system develops within the from conception to through the first 7 weeks. And examples of abnormal CNS development are something called anencephaly, in which the neural tube defectively fuses in the front, and so in the anterior area, so that the cranial vault or the top of the head, that vault doesn't develop. Okay, and then another thing would be spina bifida, and what happens is the posterior or the dorsum or the back part of the neural tube doesn't fuse together, so that you have a hole in the vertebral column. So here goes the way the neural tube develops over the first 7 weeks, during the first 7 weeks. And you see that there are different divisions. So the telencephalon here, this word you're going to learn. The telencephalon consists of the cerebral cortex, the basal ganglia, and several other structures. This mesencephalon consists of the midbrain. So this is the midbrain, or mesencephalon. Okay. The metencephalon is the pons, but they don't have it here. But when they say rhombencephalon, the rhombencephalon consists of the metencephalon and the myelencephalon. So we're talking about the pons and the medulla. Okay? So this is normal development of the brain from conception during the first 7 weeks, and that is what neuroembryology is, the study of the growth of the brain from conception through the first 7 weeks. But things can go wrong. This neural tube can have problems fusing together properly. And when that happens, you've got an anencephaly, where the anterior part of the neural tube did not close. So you can see up here at the top that the problem would be they're not going to have a cranial vault. So this remains open. Okay? So that's anencephaly without a cranial vault or cranium up in the top. And then you could also have spina bifida. And so you can see this pouching out. The fusion of the dorsal part of the neural tube did not occur, and so that's what it ends up looking like. So those are disorders of, when you have problems with neuroembryology, those are several of the problems that you could see. Okay? All right, let's see. Okay. So, neurophysiology focuses on the functional properties of the nervous system with respect to its structural, chemical, and electrical composition. So, physiology refers to the function, okay? Pathology deals with the disease, or the etiology, the nature and cause of the disease. What caused the disease to occur? And Was it like buildup of plaque or something in an artery that caused a cerebrovascular accident? Was it like a depletion of the dopamine in the substantia nigra that caused the problem with Parkinson? So the study of disorder of the nervous system is just neuropathology. Okay? So here's an example of brain function, and this is what we would be studying if we were studying neurophysiology. So what you can see in the frontal lobe is you have a premotor cortex, a motor cortex here that's voluntary movement, a premotor cortex which would be for storage of motor patterns. You have this prefrontal area here, and really all of this is prefrontal. And look at the things, look at the function: concentration, judgment, personality, inhibition, emotional traits. Broca's area here, language production, Wernicke's, comprehension, parietal lobe, body orientation, sensory discrimination. So all of these, when I'm only looking at function, I'm looking at what are these structures and what is the purpose of these structures. What do they do? Cerebellum, coordination and control of voluntary movement. Occipital lobe, receiving visual signals and interpreting them. Okay. So we went over the terminology. Okay, and so you are expected to know the terminology just to kind of summarize. We've talked about thus far the meaning of neuroscience, and we talked about the relationship between neuroscience and speech-language pathology. We also talked about the different branches of neuroscience, such as neurology, neurosurgery, neuroradiology, so forth and so on, neuroembryology, neurophysiology, neuropathology, neuroanatomy. We talked about major diseases that can occur, as if we're going to look at neurology, we're going to also look at disorders of the nervous system, and we talked about some of those. And so now we're ready to talk about the principles governing the human brain. Does anybody have any questions about anything that we've talked about thus far? Okay, great. So we might have to play, what's the name of the thing I told you? Kahoot next week. So I'll see how, it ought to be fun, but I'm going to see if it can show up in this format. Okay. If not, we might have to play it in Wiggy, or I just have to figure out how. So make sure you understand the meaning of those terms. Now let's talk about these principles. Interconnectivity in the brain is the first principle, but there are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 principles. Interconnectivity, centrality of the central nervous system, hierarchy of neural axis organization, so forth and so on. So as we talk about them, I'll explain them. Okay, so interconnectivity in the brain refers to how different areas of the brain talk to each other. That's the best way I can say that, okay? So I want you to think about everyday life. Everyday life. In order for you to drive your car, you have to be able to turn that car on. And the car must have oil in it, and the oil must, I guess, I don't know anything about cars, so, I mean, you know, don't quote me on saying what I'm saying. But I'm assuming if the car doesn't have oil, then the engine would be damaged and the car won't run. So the oil must interact with the engine so that the car can move. Am I correct, Joshua? Because I'm being racist. I'm just being sexist now, because I'm calling on the male, but it could be that my females know better about how these cars operate than you, Joshua. Okay, that being said, we're talking about the fact that the car must interact in some way with the oil. The engine must interact in some way with the oil. So the brain, one area of the brain must talk to another area of the brain in order for the areas to know what each others are doing. So we have different kinds of fibers that are part of this process. So the interconnectivity of the brain refers to how various fibers, such as commissural fibers, connect various regions of the brain, sensory and motor regions of the brain in the cerebellum. We also have association fibers that connect or send information from one area of the brain to another area of the brain, but on the same side or in the same hemisphere. And we also have projection fibers that send information from the brain into the spinal cord out to an organ or a limb or something like that. So we're saying that all parts of the brain are connected by, I want you to think of what we call these highways, you know, so that it allows information to get from one part of the brain to another part of the brain. So here's an example of the three different types of fibers that we see in the brain. Okay, so if you look here, what we're going to do is look at the commissural fibers first. Okay, and the commissural fibers are the green fibers. Now you can see fibers going from the right hemisphere to the left hemisphere. So that means that structures in the right hemisphere that are the same as those in the left hemisphere can talk to each other. Okay, now when they can't talk to each other, then we have problems. And a lot of times when somebody has a seizure, if the seizures are so bad that they cannot be controlled through medication only, then the fibers may be cut between the left hemisphere and the right hemisphere, so those two sides of the brain can no longer communicate. These fibers that we see going from the left hemisphere to the right, those green fibers are called the corpus callosum. And they're really axons of the neurons that we're going to talk about. The axons actually communicate with each other. They are the white matter, and that's where information travels. So now we also have these pink fibers within the same, on the same side, like in the right hemisphere, you've got these pink association fibers, and in the left hemisphere, you have these pink association fibers. So those fibers communicate, like, let's say we have a fiber that communicates from the very anterior part of the brain to like a structure in another gyrus in the same part of the brain. So those are called association fibers. They send information from one area of the brain, like information can be sent from the frontal lobe to the temporal lobe by way of association fibers called the arcuate fasciculus. Okay? And then you have these projection fibers in this purple or this blue. And these projection fibers are very important for getting information to come from the cerebral cortex down through the brain stem, and they project down into the spinal cord on out to some kind of limb or whatever. So those are projective fibers. So this is what we mean by the interconnectivity of the brain. Does everybody understand that concept? The brain is connected. Different parts of the brain are connected to other parts of the brain through various types of fibers. The three types of fibers are commissural, which connects structures in the right hemisphere to the same structures in the left hemisphere. Association fibers, which connects one part area of the brain, like the frontal lobe, to the temporal lobe in the same side, on the same side, like only in one hemisphere, and then projection fibers, which sends information from the cerebral cortex down into the brainstem that project down on out through the spinal cord and so forth and so on. Everybody got the concept of the interconnectivity of the brain? Okay, you guys are doing great. Okay, then we have this principle called the centrality of the central nervous system. And when we talk about the centrality of the central nervous system, all incoming and outgoing information goes through the central nervous system. And the central nervous system generates appropriate responses to the information that it receives. So, let's see how I'm going to explain that. Okay, I want everybody to take your left hand and touch your computer and tell me what you feel. How does it feel? Describe how it feels. Anybody can raise their hand and tell me. Smooth, hard. Okay. How do you think you know that? How do you know that? Nerves. Okay. Sensory nerves. Very, very good. Afferent nerves. Now, the information came in through your hand, right? And it travels from your hand, because this is touch. So it travels through one of those fiber pathways or those tracks. From your hand, it went into the spinal cord. From the spinal cord, it went into the brainstem. That information went from the brainstem into the cerebral cortex, into the parietal lobe, which is sensory. And it was interpreted in Brodmann's areas 5 and 7 of the parietal lobe. So remember we talked about the somatosensory strip or the somatosensory cortex, and we said if there's damage there to that cortex, whatever area is damaged and whatever body part is hanging upside down at that area of damage, that means you won't be able to feel. Well, what happens is when you touch the computer, that information was sent from your hand into the spinal cord, into the brainstem, to the somatosensory strip, where it recognized that something was being touched. Wherever the hand is on the somatosensory strip, that strip says, I can feel, the hand can feel. But what the hand can feel is interpreted in the parietal lobe in another area. So the central nervous system consists of the brain or the cerebrum and the spinal cord. So that information went through the central nervous system where it was interpreted and an appropriate response is received. Now, what if, just what if, you touched that computer and you just didn't like the way it felt? Would you keep your hand on the computer? No, you would remove it. Okay, and you probably would remove it reflexively. So the information may not get to the brain or the cerebrum because it may come into the spinal cord, the sensory area of the spinal cord, and just go back out like a reflexive movement, just like if it's something hot. But in order for information to be interpreted, it must come into the central nervous system or either go out of the central nervous system to some type of organ. And so this is why we call this principle the centrality of the central nervous system. Now, also think about the peripheral nervous system. If you take your two fingers, let's say take the ring finger and take the little pinky and touch each other, let them touch each other. Okay, you can feel those two fingers touching each other, but guess what? They're part of the peripheral nervous system. And so the peripheral nervous system cannot communicate directly. What the pinky cannot, the ring finger cannot communicate directly with the pinky in terms of touch. Even though you feel the touch, the information has to be sent from these two fingers into the spinal cord, into the brainstem, into the cerebral cortex, into the parietal lobe, in order for you to know that how they feel. But I can't just take one finger and have it touch the other finger and just know that those two fingers are touching. They are part of the peripheral body, so no two parts of the peripheral body can directly communicate with each other without going through the central nervous system, where the information is interpreted and analyzed. So the central nervous system is very important for interpreting and analyzing information that's coming in. All information coming in and going out is interpreted by the central nervous system. Okay? Yeah, it does. So here is the central nervous system. The central nervous system consists of the spinal cord. Excuse me, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to do that. I'm trying to get to just the red part, so it looks like scratch in the brain. That's the CNS. The peripheral nervous system are all of these nerves that come off of the spinal cord, okay, and go out to the fingers. So if information, let's say, is coming in to, I'll put it in green, about the hand touching something, let's say this thumb, that information has to go up into the spinal cord and go straight on up to the brain for you to interpret what the thumb is touching. The thumb by itself can't know that. If the thumb touches this finger here, that information has to go from both of those up here into the spinal cord to know that they are touching. Okay? So that's what we mean by the centrality of the, yes, Jacqueline? It's rapid speed, yes. Go ahead, Jacqueline.
The brain interprets the information, let's say, that it's received in the hands quicker than the feet. Well,
the answer to that might be the fact that it comes into a different part of the spinal cord. If it's coming from the hands, it's coming directly from the hand and going into the cervical area of the spinal cord and traveling straight to the brain. So in one sense, I guess the speed of conduction could be quicker. But in the other sense, it's coming from the feet going into the lumbar area. It has to travel further, but maybe the speed of conduction is just as fast. So that's an answer that's it's a good question. I don't know. I just know that it is interpreted in different areas. And so it would seem logical that it would come from the hand, go into the cervical area of the spinal cord, which is here, and just doesn't have far to travel and go straight on up to the parietal lobe, as opposed to the feet traveling from here all the way up. But it just depends on the speed of conduction. So the answer to that is possibly, but I don't really know. Okay, but good question. Any other questions? Okay. So, does everybody understand the difference between the peripheral nervous system and the central nervous system? Good. The central nervous system consists of the brain and the spinal cord. The peripheral nervous system are all of those nerves that are coming off of the brainstem and the spinal cord. Okay? And then in the peripheral nervous system, we have different divisions. We have the autonomic nervous system that consists of the parasympathetic and the sympathetic nervous system. So have you ever been very scared? And so what happens when you become afraid? What happens to your body? Okay. I'm sorry, I was chewing, so I removed the mic. All of those things, your heart races, your hands get sweaty, your eyes like really dilate. So that's what we call the sympathetic nervous system. And so, you know, you either fight or either you run, okay? You may lose control of your bowels, or you may, you know, urinate or defecate when you get really scared. So that's what we call, so that's a peripheral nervous system, and it's part of the autonomic nervous system. It's unconscious. It's very unconscious. And then you have the parasympathetic nervous system, which brings all of these. So now I'm not as afraid, so my heart stops beating, the clamminess and the sweatiness of my hands, that goes away, my pupils constrict, you know, everything comes back to normal. And then we also have the somatic nervous system, which is part of the peripheral nervous system. And this is really voluntary muscle movement that are part of the somatic system. Okay. Now, we also have this principle called the hierarchy of neuraxial organization. And that tells you that the central nervous system, which consists of the brain and the spinal cord, is hierarchically developed in complexity and organization of functions. So at the lower level of functioning, we're talking about the spinal cord. So what happens there, it's a low-level response, which is more reflexive. And I have a picture, I think, that will show you that. But the spinal cord, again, is the lowest segment level. It serves simple sensory motor functions in the form of basic reflexes that are influenced in part by the brain, the upper axal levels. And as we move up from the spinal cord to the brainstem is more complex than the spinal cord. And as we move from the brainstem up to the cerebrum, that's where voluntary thought and higher mental action occurs. So let me give you an example. Like, for example, here is the spinal cord here. This is like a section of the spinal cord. So when you go to the doctor's office, have you ever had your reflexes tested where he takes that like little hammer and he hits your knee and then the knee jumps? Okay, good. So that's a reflexive response that occurs at the level of the spinal cord, and that's what he's checking to see if the spinal cord reflexively is working appropriately. So he takes the hammer, knocks the knee. That's sensory. So here, if you can see the blue line, that information goes into the dorsal root ganglion. Then it goes into the dorsal horn, which is sensory. It synapses on a interneuron. And then what happens is, instead of it traveling up the spinal cord through the brainstem to the cerebrum and then to the parietal lobe where it can be interpreted, it's not going to do that. So what's going to happen is, because it's so reflexive and it's going to be so automatic, you're going to end up, the information is going to be sent back out through the ventral root, the ventral horn through the ventral root, and it's going to go down to the muscle and cause you to kick that leg out. So that's what we call a reflex arc. It's called a reflex arc. So at the level of the spinal cord, I don't really have to think about it. It just happens. If I had to think about it, it would take much longer, and to get to the brain part, because it has to travel a longer distance, sort of like the answer that I gave Jackie just a minute ago, although I would have to look it up because I think it depends on the speed of conduction. I mean, it could be very fast from the feet on up, but it does travel a further distance. So here is the thing. I want you to think about this thing. Just think about putting your hand on the hot stove. Are you going to keep your hand on the hot stove while that information travels to the brain, or are you going to automatically remove it? It doesn't take you but a second to remove your hand. Not even that's probably less than a second. So that information is occurring at the level of the spinal cord. And so that's the lowest level of organization in the hierarchy neuraxal of the central nervous system. That's the lowest level, and it is reflexive. Okay, but then as we move on up to the brainstem, where the thalamus is, and we call that area the diencephalon. The diencephalon consists of the thalamus and hypothalamus. The brainstem is still not voluntary, so at the level of the spinal cord, that's totally reflexive, so it's not voluntary. But it's more complex at the level of the brainstem because the brainstem is responsible for consciousness, keeping you, able to not be in a coma. It's responsible for blood pressure, respiration, sleep, temperature, endocrine, and neurotransmitter interactions, okay? Whereas the spinal cord is reflexive, that's just, you don't even think about it. The brainstem is more complex, but yet it's involuntary. Now, if you look at the things that the brainstem, the actions of the brainstem, a brainstem injury is very dangerous. Well, everything is dangerous, obviously, but you could die because the brainstem is important for all vital life operations. I mean, breathing, blood pressure, heart rate, temperature, consciousness, okay? So that's more complex than the spinal cord. And here's what the brainstem regulates: heart rate, breathing, blood pressure, swallowing, digestion. Okay, so that's more complex than the cerebrum. I mean, it's more complex than the spinal cord, but not more complex than the cerebrum. Okay, so this is what we call hierarchical, the hierarchy of the neuraxal of the CNS, okay? Now, here, once we leave the brainstem where we have all this respiration, heart rate, swallowing, then we get to the hypothalamus in this area. This controls in your homeostasis, hunger, thirst. So if somebody like is anorexic, more than likely they're having a problem in the hypothalamus area or in the diencephalon. If somebody is, they overeat and they can't stop eating, then that's a problem with the hypothalamus. Okay, it also regulates fight or flight responses, mating behavior, or sexual behavior. But then when we get up to the cerebrum, now we're talking about voluntary behavior. The way I think about something. I say, I got to figure out how I'm going to get to Colorado. Maybe I'm going to fly, but I don't have any money. Let me see. What can I do? I don't get paid before the 31st. Maybe I got to go borrow some money. Maybe I can see if I can get somebody to buy me a free ticket. My sister flies out there to work, so maybe I can go on some of her points. So you see, that's the cerebrum. That's higher order thought. Okay? All right. Okay. So any questions about that? Now we're looking at the cerebrum. And, speech, thinking, reasoning, understanding, touch, feeling, all those things are higher order. So remember, spinal cord, reflexive, brainstem, involuntary but vital for life functions, cerebrum, voluntary, thinking, movement, so forth and so on. Okay, so the cerebrum is the most complex. Any questions about that? Everybody got that? Everybody understand that concept? Okay. All right, because you have to know these concepts. Okay. All right, so a lot of information, but we're almost finished with the principles. Let's see. The laterality of brain organization. And somebody already talked to me about this tonight. The right side of the brain functions differently than the left side of the brain. But both hemispheres are anatomically symmetrical. I mean, one might be slightly larger than the other, but they're they're bilateral. Symmetry is the same. The structures are in the same location, so to speak, in both hemispheres. But then we have unilateral function. The right side of the brain is more of the spatial temporal artistic side. The left side of the brain is the language side of the brain. And then we also have this principle of contralateral control. So the right side of the brain controls the left side of the body. The left side of the brain controls the right side of the body. So this is what we mean when we talk about the laterality of brain organization. It refers to bilateral anatomical symmetry between the two hemispheres, unilateral functional differences, left side, language, right side, spatial, temporal, artistic, and then contralateral control. Right side control the left side of the body, left side control the right side of the body. Yes, Michelle.
And they connect through those fibers, correct?
Absolutely. Very good connection that you just made. So when we talk about bilateral anatomical symmetry, those structures are the same in the right hemisphere and the left hemisphere, but they communicate with each other or connect through the commissural fibers. One of those fibers being the corpus callosum, which we'll learn the structures of. Another one of those fibers being the anterior commissure, and another the posterior commissure. Okay, so yes. Now, if we're talking about unilateral functioning in the left hemisphere only, where that's the language hemisphere, let's say that Broca's area has to communicate with Wernicke's area. It's done through association fibers, and one of those being the arcuate fasciculus. And so in that case, the frontal lobe is the motor lobe. So language, the person is talking, but the person has to understand what he or she is saying, and so that whatever that person is saying is being sent to the temporal lobe where it's being understood through those fibers. So yes, there goes the connection. And this is an example of the left side of the body and the right side of the body being symmetrical bilaterally. I'm doing this because I'm just to show you that one half of the body might be a little larger than the other, but they have the same structures. Okay, so that's the bilateral concept. The unilateral differences are the left hemisphere is dominant for language. The right hemisphere is dominant for spatial, temporal, artistic types of things. Also emotion, musical skills, metaphor, humor, stress, intonation. So I'm talking to you, right? And you hear me putting sounds together to produce words, putting words together to produce sentences. Everybody agree? That part that you hear. Those words that you hear, that part is the language part, and that is dominant in the left hemisphere. It's the left hemisphere that's working appropriately for me to be able to put sounds together to produce words. And for you to understand what those sounds and words are, that's the left hemisphere function. But listen to me talk. So you also hear paralanguage, right? Because you hear intonation, prosody, rhythm, you hear what? And that's the emotional side. And that's interpreted not in the left hemisphere, but that's interpreted in the right hemisphere. You understand? Does that make sense? So what you actually hear me saying, the language part of it is left, but the pragmatic, the suprasegmental features that you hear, the rising and falling intonation, the loudness, the intensity, the stress, that's the emotion part. That's the right hemisphere. Okay? All right, good. So that's what we mean by this unilateral functional differences. Prosody, stress, intonation is interpreted in the right hemisphere, but it goes along with the language that you hear, which is processed in the left hemisphere. And at birth, both hemispheres have equal potential or the ability to develop many different skills. And we know that because you have people who, for example, they have a problem, let's say, with the left hemisphere that might cause a hemispherectomy, so they remove the left hemisphere. So then that person develops language in the right hemisphere. So at birth, each hemisphere has the ability to, they're equal, and then they become specialized. Okay? And then, okay, we understand the contralateral part. So we know that the left motor cortex controls movements in the right half of the body. So somebody asked me earlier, so if the lesion is in the left hemisphere, in that primary motor cortex, then it would be the right side of the body that couldn't move, okay? Because the left hemisphere controls the right side of the body and vice versa. Okay. So, all right. So right now we've talked about interconnectivity of the brain through association, projection, and commissural fibers so that the brain is always talking to each other. We talked about the centrality of the central nervous system, meaning that all information coming into the central nervous system must go to the cerebral cortex to be interpreted, but that the peripheral nervous system, two areas of the peripheral nervous system cannot communicate with each other. That information must come into the peripheral nervous system and go into the spinal cord up to the brain to be interpreted. So that's what we mean by the centrality of the central nervous system. We talked about the hierarchy of the neuraxial organization, so that the spinal cord is the lowest level of this hierarchy. It's reflexive in nature. The next would be the brainstem, which is more complex than the spinal cord, but it's involuntary and it helps us to stay alive. And then the final would be the cerebral cortex, which is very voluntary, which is high-level cognitive skills, language, thinking, speaking, reading, writing, calculation, blah, blah, blah. And then we talked about the laterality of brain organization, and that has in it three principles. The fact that you have bilateral symmetry of the right and left sides of the brain, but unilateral functioning, so the right side is more artistic, spatial, temporal, emotional, so forth, whereas the left side is more language-based. And then we talked about contralateral control. The right side of the brain controls the left side of the body. The left side of the brain controls the right side of the body. So that's 1, 2, 3, 4 principles. So we got 1, 2, 3, 4 more to go. So now we're talking about the structural and functional specialization. So neuronal systems are functionally specialized. In other words, neurons have different functions. There are different types of neurons. There are different types of cellular structures, and they have different functions. So we have different types of fiber tracts. We have sensory fiber tracts. We have motor fiber tracts, and they all specialize. So we have this system called the anterolateral system, which you're going to learn about. But the anterolateral system controls the, is important for pain, temperature, diffuse touch. And those fibers for pain and temperature run parallel to fibers for diffuse touch. And so that's when we're going to learn the tracks. But there are two different tracks. So we have the lateral spinal thalamic tract and the anterior spinal thalamic tract. The lateral spinal thalamic tract is pain and temperature, and anterior is diffuse touch. And then we have another couple of sensory tracts. These are different types of neuronal systems called fasciculus gracilis, fasciculus cuneatus. Fasciculus gracilis and cuneatus are both responsible for proprioception, vibration, discriminative touch, but fasciculus gracilis is responsible for proprioception, position, which is position sense, vibration, and discriminative touch of the lower part of the body. So that would be the legs, from the waist down. Fasciculus cuneatus, that's a different neuronal system, is responsible for proprioception, pressure, discriminative touch, vibration of the upper part of the body. Okay, so that's what we mean by structural and functional specialization. We have the cortical spinal tract, which is motor, which sends, but you got two tracks in that, the lateral cortical spinal tract and the ventral cortical spinal tract, which means that information is sent from the cortex through the spinal cord, and it's responsible for movement, but different kinds of movement. One is responsible for more fine type of movement. The other one is more gross types of movements. So that's what we mean by that. Okay, and then the cortical bulbar tracts only run from the cortex to the brainstem, and they're responsible for information that would come from the face, the jaw area, the auditory area, so forth and so on. Any questions about this principle? Yeah, it is a mouthful, but you will learn all of that, Michelle. Okay, what I'm trying to show you is the concept is that we've got all these neuronal systems, and they are functionally specialized. The one for pain and temperature is different than the one for pressure or discriminative touch. The one for diffuse touch is different. The one for motor, gross motor, is different than the one for fine motor. Okay? Then we have this next principle called topographical organization in cortical pathways. And so what we have here is spatial arrangements of peripheral receptors in the body. And this spatial arrangement is discretely maintained within the information carrying pathways and projected to the brain. So these tracts are spatially organized, and they have different order, like you have first order neurons that travel to connect with second order neurons that travel to connect with third order neurons. And you have this topographical representation of different neuronal areas that are only able to describe the function of various parts of the body, so to speak. Now here's an example of a tract. information traveling, let's say, from, and this track could be a track of pain because I'm looking at the track. Information coming in and traveling up. This is a track that is a very special track. It has its own function, and it's different from this particular. Let me change the color. From this track, the information is different. Okay, so that's what we mean by these tracks, they specialize. I also want to show you this topographical representation. Here is the homunculus that I was talking about. So here is the left hemisphere. You can see that the leg and the feet are represented. They hang over into the longitudinal fissure. Here is the longitudinal fissure in green down here that I'm drawing. And here is the primary motor strip, and this blue strip is the sensory strip. And here is the homunculus, or the little man. That's what homunculus is called. You can see the legs and the feet hang over into the longitudinal fissure. Look at where the chest is represented. Forget about the face, it's not represented up there. Then you come down, there's the arm here. The fingers are represented close to the face. Look at the mouth, the lips, look at the teeth, look at the tongue. Okay, so this is a topographical, I'm a little apraxic, topographical representation. Okay, topographical representation, where all of these things, it's a discreteness in which information is retained in the neuronal pathways, and you have very specialized peripheral receptors in the body that go from the body to the brain. And so this spatial relationship is always there. The tongue is always down at the bottom of the primary motor or primary sensory cortex. The legs are always hanging into the longitudinal fissure area. Any questions about that? Yes, but yes, both of these are left hemispheres, but they're just showing you if you look at the body, they're showing you different orientation as it relates to the homunculus. So the dorsal side of the homunculus is represented by the first hemisphere, and they're also showing you the ventral side of the homunculus represented on the left hemisphere, if that makes sense. So yeah, both are the left hemisphere. But the body is turned. You see the back laying down on the, he's showing you the hips, the legs, the trunk, the neck here, and you're still looking at the same thing, but from the guy lying on his stomach versus the guy lying on his back. Okay? Any questions about that? Okay? The next one is the plasticity of the brain, or the ability of the brain to change as a result of experience. It's also the ability of the brain to reorganize and modify functions and adapt to internal and external changes. So like, for example, if the brain is damaged, then other areas of the brain may take on the function, and that's what we call the neuroplasticity of the brain. Did you guys ever talk about Genie in your language development class? Jeannie was the girl who was abused. She was locked away in, okay, good. Yeah, she was locked away in an attic or somewhere. And the question is, could she develop language? Because I believe, if I'm not mistaken, and you can correct me, but that she was discovered at age 13. And when she was discovered, she didn't really have a language. But she did have the ability to learn some components of a language. I think that she could do very rudimentary syntax, like she could put objects and nouns and verbs together, but she couldn't do like complex types of sentences, things like that, with all the different types of transformations. And this shows you that plasticity does occur, but it's better that you learn languages when you're younger because the brain is more plastic. It does have the ability to, some parts of the brain have the ability to take on other functions if there's damage. Best time to learn is when the brain is developing and you're learning at the same time. As we get older, the brain is less plastic, but you can learn new things, and the way to expand the neural networks in the brain would be to actually learn new tasks instead of doing the same tasks that you already know how to do over and over again, because the brain, no new networks are developed. So the brain does have this amazing plasticity, ability to take on different functions, but as you get older, that plasticity reduces. Regeneration can occur, but like of a area where damage occurs, but regeneration mostly occurs in the central not in the central nervous system, but in the peripheral nervous system. But you can, so like, for example, regeneration of axons can occur in the peripheral nervous system, but not necessarily in the central nervous system. But you can build new networks by, again, learning new tasks, doing new things. Okay, the last principle is something called the non-mythical brain. And the non-mythical brain says that the brains across individuals are basically similar in terms of the way they look, in terms of where things are. You can build knowledge by learning, reading, exposure. But the operation of the brain in general is not governed by any personal characteristic like gender or color or cultural variations. Its power is judged by the efficiency at which it remembers information, it processes information coming in, the way you can generate a response, the way you attend to tasks, you plan, you make decisions, and you project information. Okay, so if the brains were different, then it would be very difficult for the neurosurgeon to go in and actually do brain surgery, because he would have to be learning where structures are that typically would be one place for one person if we thought about there being a culture or gender difference, and those same structures aren't there for somebody else of another culture. So that's a myth that, you know, people of different cultures, color, gender, and so forth have brains that are different. In essence, the knowledge that you may have is governed by how you behave, but the brain itself remains the same. Okay, so it's nothing mystical about the brain other than it's just a fascinating instrument. Okay, so that was the last principle, and that being said, the last four, in just summary, the last four concepts we talked about was neuronal systems being functionally specialized, The topographical representation, meaning that there is a spatial relationship and organization of the neurons, the tracts, and so forth. We talked about the plasticity of the brain, meaning that the brain does have the ability to reorganize and modify its functions when pathology is an issue. But we also said that there is a critical period for learning things, like a critical period for language development, and so that the earlier the better, because then plasticity reduces. We talked about the culturally neutral brain or the non-mythical brain, meaning that gender and color and culture variation does not govern the brain, but things such as how you process information, how you remember it, how you make decisions, those are things that govern the organization of the brain. Okay, does anybody have any questions about the principles? Okay. Now, what I typically do in the next class is come back and we interact, and I'll be asking a lot of questions just as a review, and I'll even try to play. If I can figure out how to get it work, we'll play we'll play Cahoots. That's just to see what you remember. So make sure you read chapter 1. Okay. Okay. Now I need to orientate you to basic terminology, because we're going to be looking at the brain in different positions. So I want you to think of an anatomical position. The anatomical position is that if you were to stand erect with your feet together and your arms hanging at the side and your thumbs pointing away from your body. That's what we mean by anatomical position. So we're going to use these terms like ventral, anterior, dorsal, posterior, caudal, rostral, sagittal, mid-sagittal, so forth, coronal. So you've got to learn these terminologies, because when you look at the brain, you're going to be looking at it in various orientations. So ventral means away from the backbone or toward the front of the body. So if everybody will put your hand on your stomach and think about your face, that is ventral, okay? Anterior means toward the front or away from the back, so that's also anterior. Any questions about that? Okay. Now, everybody, I want you to put your hand on your back and find your backbone, because that's dorsal. But that's also posterior. Dorsal means away from the front of the body and toward the backbone. Posterior means away from the front and toward the back. Okay? So ventral and anterior means the front of the body, like where the stomach is. Dorsal, posterior means the back of the body, like where the back is. Superficial means towards the surface. So you've heard people say, well, you have a superficial wound. It means that it was just a surface wound. It just barely cut the surface. Superior means upper. It means above, okay? All right. So like your head would be superior. The top of your head would be superior. Superficial would be towards the surface of the skin, okay? Cranial means toward the head. Rostral means toward the head. Cephalic means toward the head. So head meaning, like, think of your head, but caudal meaning towards the tail, which would be restricted to your trunk area. Okay. Deep means away from the surface. So like, as opposed to superficial, which is close to the surface, deep means think of somebody stabbing you, and it's a deep wound, so it's going towards your internal organs. So that's what we mean by deep. And then, let's see. Inferior means lower, as distinct from deep. Now, so here are examples of some of the terminology. Superior, above the head. Inferior, down below the head or down towards the feet. Ventral, the front part of the body. Dorsal, the back part. And posterior, the back part. Anterior, the front part. Lateral means going towards the outside or going to, as opposed to medial means going towards the spinal cord. Okay? Anybody have any questions about those terms? Okay, now let's look at the brain. Remember that ventral means towards the front. But if I were to take this brain and I were to turn it upward, okay, so let's say I were just to hold it up, just turn it up, I would be looking at, let's say, the stomach, as opposed to the top of the brain, which would be the back. So superior means above, so superior and dorsal mean the same thing as it relates to the brain, okay? Because remember, this is like the back of the brain or the top of the brain, depending on if I stand it up. And this is like the bottom of the brain or the front of the brain. Well, it's not the front, but the bottom of the brain. So in this case, this would be inferior, and I can't really write with this pen. This would be superior. This would be dorsal, ventral. Now, rostral is anterior, so this is the frontal lobe, so this is rostral, or the front towards the front of the brain. Caudal, or posterior would be towards the back of the brain, and that's the occipital lobe, just for orientation. Any questions about this figure that you're looking at? Okay, because you got to learn these. External means towards the outer surface. It's often used to describe body cavities, but sometimes it's used synonymously with superficial, because superficial means like a superficial wound towards the surface. But external means towards the outer surface. Internal means toward the inner surface. Sometimes it's used interchangeably with deep. Okay. If you have questions, stop me. We already talked about medial meaning towards the midline axis, lateral meaning away from the axis or midline. Proximal means towards the body or towards the root of a free extremity. So proximal really means close into the trunk of the body. Distal means away from the body or the root of a free extremity. So distal would be my fingers, distal would be my toes, proximal would be my arms, the upper arm close to the trunk, so forth and so on. Sagittal plane divides the body into right and left half. So if I were to divide my body straight down the middle, then that's what we call a sagittal, a mid-sagittal plane. Okay? If I were to take the skull and divide it into the right and left halves mid-sagittally, that would be like dead in the middle. Coronal or frontal plane divides the body into front and back. So if I were to make the cut at the hairline, cut my body in half so that the front of my body, the stomach, would fall forward and the back would fall backwards, then that's a coronal or frontal plane. Transverse plane divides the body into upper and lower half. So here is an example of coronal. So this is the frontal lobe, and this is the temporal lobe. This is parietal, and this is occipital. So coronal divides the brain into front and back. This is front, and this is back. Sagittal divides the brain into equal halves, like right and left. So sagittal would divide it into right versus left. Horizontal is just like you have a horizontal plane where you're going horizontal, so this is horizontal and this is vertical. Well, here you go. That's a horizontal plane there. This is a vertical plane here. Let me know if you guys have questions. Any questions about those? And if you look on page 11 of your textbook, you can see dorsal, ventral, because you're looking at an animal, the lowest form of the nervous system. If you look at a dog, the back of the dog is dorsal, but that's also the top of the brain. The lower part, ventral part, is the stomach area of a dog on all four, but that's also the underside of the brain, so forth and so on. So they're showing you this on page figure 1, 2. And if you turn to page 13 and look at figure 1 through 3, they show you coronal, sagittal, horizontal, and transverse cuts. Okay? So now, let's look at, and we're almost done. I know, yes, is horizontal the same as transverse? Transverse divides the body into upper and lower. Upper versus lower, but it's on a diagonal, which makes it transverse. Horizontal is actually on the horizontal. So here is the, okay, let me do a brain stem. I'm trying to draw a brain stem, but I cannot draw, so don't criticize my brain stem. Can you see that brain stem that I drew down at the bottom? Okay. Yes, okay. So if it was horizontal, it would go straight across, just like that. But if it's transverse, it goes on a diagonal, just like that. Does that make sense? This is a horizontal cut, and this is a transverse cut. Can you guys see that? Okay. So now, only a couple more slides, and we'll stop and we'll finish this in the next class. Flexion is the bending movement of a limb. So if you flex your limb, it's like, show me a muscle. You have to flex to show the muscle. Extension is the straightening movement of the limb. Abduction, the limb is moved away from the central axis of the body, as opposed to adduction. And I think of add like you add two things together. The limb is brought towards the central axle of the body. Okay? So here's an example of extension versus flexion. Extension versus flexion. Okay? Here's an example of abduction, moving the body, moving the arms away from the body, but adding, moving them back towards the central midline. Adduction. Adduction. Pronation means that you're going to turn the palms downward. And supination means that you turn the palms upward. So here's an example of pronation. The palm is turned downward, as opposed to supination, the palm is turned upwards. Then we have different kinds of muscles. We have skeletal muscles, cardiac muscles, and smooth muscles. The skeletal muscles contain striated fibers, and they're under volitional control. So those are the muscles like you use, like you can flex your muscles. Those are skeletal. You can straighten your legs or flex it, but you're moving those muscles. So those are skeletal, they're volitional. Cardiac muscles are striated fibers too, but they're not volitional. So the cardiac muscle would be your heart. And then your smooth muscles are non-striated as opposed to skeletal and cardiac, but they are considered involuntary. And those are examples of all those muscles you see are skeletal muscles there. And this is an example of a cardiac muscle here, and that's cardiac muscle there. And these are smooth muscles here. And those are the muscles we use in respiration, digestion, things like that. So these are smooth muscles. So those are, again, the esophagus, respiration, digestion, so forth. Okay? And I promise you, 2 more slides and we are stopping. We'll finish next week. Monoplegia is paralysis of either an upper or lower limb. So it's one limb, upper or lower. Hemiplegia means one side of the body, so it includes the upper and the lower limb, both are being paralyzed. Triplegia means one side of the body plus another limb on the other side, and quadriplegia means paralysis of 4 limbs. And if they're paraplegia, it means that both of the lower limbs are affected. So here's an example of monoplegia. Only this limb is affected. Paraplegia, both lower limbs are affected. Hemiplegia, the limbs on one side are affected. Quadriplegia, all 4 limbs are affected. Okay, we'll stop here. And so you see, I can go 4 hours with no problem. And probably could go another 4, but no. Okay. So what happens is generally it refers to the lower limbs, and generally we don't see both. It's rare to see just both arms paralyzed. Usually you'll see, I mean it could happen, but usually you will see either somebody that's a quadriplegia, triplegia, mono, or hemi. But para only refers to lower. Okay. Anything else? Yeah, ALS, and I'm so sorry to hear that. His upper limbs went first, and then what happened with his lower limbs? Did he eventually lose all of his motor functioning, or is he still doing okay, but just with no upper limbs?
It started in his thumbs and then his hands, and it was actually the doctors knew it was a form of ALS, but it was a very slow, rare form. It developed over like 20 years. He lived with it for a very long time, and then he passed away several years ago. But they couldn't explain it because his was very unusual, they said. Yeah, that's what I say. It's usually it's unusual to just see the arms paralyzed, and eventually everything becomes paralyzed because of the nature of ALS. So I'm sorry to hear that. Okay, how did he communicate as time went on? Just curious. Did he have did he use eye gaze, or did he have a communication board, or his speech remained? Yeah, he talked until almost the very end, and then he did have he had a specialized chair and a specialized computer where he could type with his eyes. Mm-hmm. And so, I mean, he lived a very long life. He was old when he passed away, but it just got to the point where he couldn't swallow, and just that was the very end. Yeah. So, but yeah, he talked until the very end, which was really nice. Well, thank you so much for sharing that. Okay, does anybody have any questions about anything we talked about tonight? Any questions? Everybody good? Okay, then your assignment is to review this PowerPoint and to
read chapters 1 and read chapter 5 for next week, and chapter 2, 1, 2, and 5. It's a lot, but read it over a period of time. Okay. Oh, thank you. I appreciate that. Yeah, it's a lot of terminology at first, guys, but that's why you got to keep up and don't miss my class, because it's hard coming back to learn some of this stuff. Because it's easier to read it, but it's easier for me to explain it when I'm talking to you. So, and this lecture is recorded, and so you can go back and listen to it. What I would like for you to do is read chapter 1, and, you know, after you finish reading chapter 1, then go back and do the review questions again. If I were you, I would do them for my own self, and they will help you learn the terminology. And if I need them, you know, if I tell you to do them, then I'll give you credit for it, but I would just do them just because. Okay? All right, guys. Have a good night, and welcome to Neuroanatomy. It's a pleasure to have you in my class. I'm looking forward to meeting each and every one of you. I know some of you already, and I'll see you next week. Okay, good night. You're welcome.